Welcome to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning, the committee will be discussing matters concerning the resignation of the former Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Dame Cressida, following our first discussion on this subject on the 16th of November. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Davina, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies from Assembly Member Ahmad.
Thank you, Davina. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of November 2022 and 22nd of November 2022 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings?
Noted.
Thank you. So we now move on to our main item of business. Oh, apologies.
Yeah.
Assembly Member Desai.
Sorry, but before you start, I think I made the point last time that there are 4 parties to this meeting. We have the Mayor and we have Sir Tom Winsor. We did write again to the ex-Home Secretary Priti Patel and the ex-Commissioner Cressida requesting them to come to this meeting. I can understand the position of the ex-Commissioner, but what happened, what was the response from the ex-Home Secretary?
That they were unable to attend. We can't make people attend, as you know.
But did she give a reason?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just a letter that was too busy. I think you've all seen the
Too
letter.
busy? Well, I'm sure.
No,
Yeah.
don't
Okay.
hold me to that. She's unable to attend. That's all we need to know.
Okay, Chair, I'll just say it speaks volumes for a failure to be here.
I think it just says that somebody cannot attend the meeting. So we now move on to our main item of business. Sorry? On the 22nd of November, under the provisions of Section 35(5) of the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011, the committee agreed to require the attendance of the Mayor of London at today's meeting in his capacity as the occupant of MOPAC to answer further questions around his actions in relation to the resignation of the former Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Dame Cressida. So I would like to welcome our guests, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London and occupant of MOPAC, and Sir Thomas Winsor. Good morning, gentlemen. Now, as is normal, as chairman, I will take the first few questions, if I may. So, if I can start with you, Mr. Mayor. I've been looking through the transcripts and obviously the last meetings, and there are some issues that I would like to go back on, just for clarification. So, when we're talking about the scope of the investigation, do you understand that the terms of reference for Sir Tom's investigation explicitly excluded any assessment of the performance of the Metropolitan Police or its Commissioner? And do you understand that the terms of reference emphasise that the investigation was about process and not substance, that it was purely about how you and your staff conducted themselves and how the Commissioner and her staff conducted themselves?
That's not the case. In the words of Sir Tom at the last meeting, I quote, "The whole factual matrix is relevant."
Sir Tom, do you want to come back on that?
The terms of reference say precisely what you just said.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just make a quick point, a very quick point? The terms of reference also do say establish and assess the full facts, timeline of events and circumstances. Can I stress the word circumstances, which resulted in the status of Dame Cressida. So I think I agree with the Mayor that we've got to look at everything, all the events leading up to her going. I do apologise, Chair.
Yes, if you
And
could
that's not the
turn
Home
your phone
Secretary,
off.
by the way.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So
we've got to look at things in totality. That's what I'm
well,
trying to say.
if you look at the beginning of the actual report, it specifically says what it's about process and not substance. Okay.
May I?
Well,
may
Chair,
I
with
just-
respect.
Sorry,
go on.
Sorry, Sir Tom.
All right. Assembly Member Desai is right. The factual matrix is relevant. That's what I said last time. But paragraph 4 of my terms of reference say the review will not assess the merits of the performance of the Commissioner or the Metropolitan Police. The review is concerned with process, not substance. Now, you can't look at the process without having regard to the factual matrix, but it was not my job to determine whether the Met or the Commissioner were doing a good job or a bad job That was not the focus of the exercise, but naturally the exercise has to have regard, as Assembly Member Desai says, to the underlying factual matrix.
Fine.
And Chair, and the other point about the terms of reference is terms of reference state quite clearly, establish and assess the full facts, timeline of events and circumstances. No mention in the report of Sir Tom about the abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard. No mention in his report about the police of Clapham Common. No mention in his report about the derogatory comments and the photographs taken of Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry. No mention in his report about the report into the case of Daniel Morgan. No mention about the stop and search of Bianca Williams.
I hope, Mr. Mayor, you're not going to just go through that the whole time. We are looking at this report.
I'm answering the question, Chair. You may not like the answer, but it's an answer to the question.
Well, cooperation with the investigation. You seem to have issues that you said that you cooperated fully with the investigation. But how can you reconcile that statement with the fact that Sir Tom had to ask you in writing 9 times for an interview? You refused to be interviewed alone and insisted on David Bellamy and Sophie Linden being present with you. You did not agree to an interview until 4 months after you were first asked for an interview, and only when you saw the provisional conclusions of the investigation. So how would you term that as full cooperation?
Well, Chair, as you'll be aware, we wrote to Sir Tom, stating out circumstances surrounding the Commissioner's stepping aside / resignation. A number of letters were written relying upon contemporaneous records, using emails, minutes and so forth. And Sir Tom was provided with all the information that we had. Sir Tom chose, by the way, to believe the words of officers, he said in his own report, which are preferential to him rather than other evidence. That's the choice Sir Tom made. We were quite clear in relation to providing Sir Tom with all the material, and now you've been given some of the representations we made subsequently. You'll see some of the concerns we had, which justifies actually the approach taken, which is to give Sir Tom the most accurate recollection of events, which are the contemporaneous records, letters written after refreshing memories using those documents as aid memoirs. So Tom chose to prefer the version of events given by the former Commissioner, the former Deputy Commissioner, the former Assistant Commissioner, for reasons he's, to give him credit, he's been honest with. He trusts them more than he trusts non-police officers.
Did you want to come back on that, Sir Tom?
Well, in paragraph 189, I refer to all the instances that the Mayor referred to earlier, the murder of Sarah Everard and the other things. So it is in the report. As far as the quality of evidence is concerned, paragraph 21 of my report explains how I evaluated evidence, including the weight and credibility of those who gave me evidence. I said that I have generally been able to attribute more weight to evidence by reference to its consistency with contemporaneous documents, and the Mayor mentioned those, the degree to which that evidence is corroborated by the accounts of other people, the detail and specificity of the evidence, and my ability to test that evidence in interview with the person concerned, including that person's willingness and ability to answer questions put to them, and overall its inherent credibility and coherence. No single factor is more important than any other. Each has been relevant to differing extents in relation to differing aspects of the evidence. I've evaluated it exactly the way any investigator, or indeed every court, would do so. And I think the Mayor is going far too far to say that if a police officer has spoken to me, I will automatically believe them if that's what he wishes to imply, because that is clearly not the case. And in quite a number of respects throughout the report, I say that I have accepted the evidence of the Mayor over other evidence.
I know, I've seen that in the report. Mr. Mayor, why were you so busy in those 4 months? I mean, Sir Tom had interviewed over 50 other people in his investigation. Do you not think it would have been more sensible to spare him a few hours of your time to deal with a matter of such importance?
As I explained earlier today at the previous PCC, Sir Tom was provided with all the information and he had access to all the information. It was only subsequently, and the response that you've now received from Council explains some of the concerns we had about Sir Tom's original report, some of which he changed, and he was given all the information that he needed to embark upon his report.
Sir Tom changed things in the report when after he'd actually had a proper interview with you. That's correct, isn't it, Sir Tom? I'm sure that is in the report.
Yeah, the whole report was trawled through in minute detail as a result of the oral evidence of the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor's Chief of Staff. We worked very, very hard on that report after that interview on the 17th of August to ensure that everything the Mayor had put to us was A, assessed and analysed, and B, where it could be accepted, then it was accepted, and it's throughout the report. You know, we did a very meticulous and thorough job. I'm interested in what the Mayor just said about a response from Council. I don't know anything about that. If that's subsequent to the 16th of November, perhaps that will come to light sometime.
Perhaps it will. I mean, I've looked it up in several places. Sir Tom says he accepts your evidence in paragraph 184, 196, 208, 211.
The reference for Sir Tom is 20th of August 2022.
Oh, that was the one 2 days. Right, okay, I get that. That was when extensive legal advice was given, legal advice given to the Mayor was sent to me 2 days before the end of my commission. I was quite startled that it had taken 4.5 months for that to come, but it came and we took it fully into account.
Okay.
And that is stated in the report, just the extent to which we'd taken it into account. So we looked at everything.
Well, not quite. That's not quite right, is it, Chair? Because Sir Tom has gone at lengths to say how important it is to look in the eye of a witness. He gives great detail and attention to the extension of the former Commissioner's contract in September. He also gives a lot of detail and attention to the meeting the former Commissioner and I had with the Home Secretary. On no occasion did he look into her eyes, the former Secretary, and check whether she believed she accepted my version of events or the former Commissioner's. An obvious thing open to Sir Tom was to ask the former Home Secretary, who I appreciate is too busy to come today, during the course of investigation, say to the Home Secretary, you had conversations with the Mayor back in September when it came to extending the Commissioner's contract. At any stage, did he express some concerns about, for example, the Sarah Everard case, about, for example, what happened to open to Sir Tom to ask the Home Secretary? You were at the meeting in January. The Commissioner's given one version of events, the Mayor's given a different version of events. What do you think, Home Secretary? Instead, you relied upon a cursory letter.
Did you want to come back on that, Sir Tom?
The letter wasn't cursory, and there were discussions with the Home Secretary before the commission was issued. In terms of looking into people's eyes, I looked very carefully into the Mayor's eyes and the eyes of the Deputy Mayor and Mr. Bellamy to assess their credibility in the rather brief interview that they were willing to give me after 4 months of asking.
Yeah, can you explain to me why you wouldn't do a meeting on your own, Mr. Mayor?
I was happy to. I think the Sir Tom wanted to meet with the Chief of Staff and Deputy Mayor as well, who were on annual leave, and so the date offered to Sir Tom was one where he could kill 3 birds with 1 stone. I'm more than happy to meet with Sir Tom by myself. We were hoping that the voluminous documentation he'd been given would be sufficient. It was quite clear when we read his gist that it wasn't, which is why we responded to the gist, but also agreed to meet with him.
In the report, it mentions that you couldn't do the date because the Chief of Staff and the Deputy Mayor were on holiday.
Because it's quite clear Sir Tom was paying a lot of credence to the meeting on the 2nd of February, at which both the Deputy Mayor and the Chief of Staff were present, and also events on the 10th of February, parallel conversations that we rehearsed last time, taking place between the Chief of Staff and the Met Police Service, acting on behalf of the former Commissioner. and indeed the Deputy Mayor with, I think, Robin Wilkinson, but I'm sure Sir Tom may have the detail.
Did you want to come back, Sir Tom?
I think the Mayor has an imperfect recollection. It was my very strong wish to interview the Mayor separately from the Deputy Mayor, separately from the Chief of Staff. That's the way investigations get done. Now, it's not a criminal investigation, of course, but you don't interview people who were witness to the same events in the same room at the same time so they can hear what everybody else is saying. That's just not what they do. So the tripartite interview on the 17th of August 2022 was not at my request. It was contrary to my wishes. I would much have preferred to have seen the Mayor. In the early part of August, when I had secured yet a further extension from the Home Secretary in order to be able to interview the Mayor, I made the point to, I think it was Diana Lutchford, the MOPAC Chief Executive, that I wanted to see the Mayor on his own. She said, well, he can't see you because Sophie Linden and David Bellamy are on holiday. And I made the point, I don't need to see Sophie Linden and David Bellamy with the Mayor. I want to see the Mayor on his own. But I was told that was not possible, and the Mayor would only see me in the presence of the two other individuals. That is a very unsatisfactory state of affairs, but I had to take what I was given. When I was appointed to this commission in March 2022, and I may have mentioned this at the last meeting of this committee, my immediate reaction to the Home Office officials who were drawing up the terms of reference was, are you going to give me statutory powers? And they said no. We have no expectation they will be necessary because we expect everyone will give you full and timely cooperation. They were wrong.
Well, Chair, another question that could be asked of the former Home Secretary if she was here, but she's not.
No, so let's stick to asking you questions. Right, okay, thank you. Right, another thing that came up at the last meeting was bias. So, Mr Mayor, on the 2nd of September 2022, did City Hall put out to journalists a briefing pack attacking the integrity, independence and objectivity of Sir Tom Winsor?
I'm sure we can find out and write to you after the meeting. I just don't know.
Okay, well, we have a copy of it. So you're telling me it wasn't done with your knowledge?
So I'm not sure about the details of a press pack put out, but I could let you know.
Or a press release or something.
I can help the Mayor. There it is.
Yeah. So Tom may put out one press release a year, but I put out more than one, so I'm just not aware of the detail of the press pack.
It's not a press release, it's a briefing document which journalists were required to explain their credentials before City Hall staff would hand it over. And that's how I got it. And I was really quite startled at how negative the briefing was, and also how amateurish, shoddy and childish that it was. But it is as it is.
Do you want to tell it? Do you want to tell us what was in it?
Well, it's 7 pages long.
Oh, we've got time.
I don't think we have to
We do.
Do it. It goes right back to my time as rail regulator and how I resisted the threats made to me by the Secretary of State for Transport in relation to the illegal political takeover of Railtrack by the Labour government. This was a legal act by Labour politicians, and I'm criticised for criticising that illegality. And here we are.
Okay.
Here we are again.
I think we're just going off track, Chair. I'm not sure whether this is relevant to what we are discussing. I think we're certainly going off track.
It's about bias.
We spent 3 hours
No,
a few weeks
it's about
ago.
bias, yes.
Yeah.
And the Mayor said that Sir Tom was biased and he couldn't be objective. And we're just going through that. That release or this document was given to the press before Sir Tom Windsor's report was out there.
I think it was the same day.
Was it the same day? Anyway, perhaps you'd like to leave that with the Mayor and he can look at it. Putting out press release like that is not helpful, I would have thought.
I do know, of course, Chair, that I wasn't aware that Sir Tom was a firebrand socialist in his youth.
Yes, he was.
Which is...
yes,
who
so...
knew?
Yeah.
Well, I did, and I have my Labour Party card from 1977.
Oh, please.
And a Labour Party card with the old clause...
So, Tom, you've got to renew. You've got to renew.
With the old clause 4.
We're on the new leadership. Not clause 4, I'm afraid, but you're most welcome to join. Lots of people are joining.
You can go off people, Sir Tom. You can go off people.
But Firebrand...
Which trade union are you a member of?
Don't. Please, not
Chair,
today.
can I just say I was never a firebrand
which trade
socialist.
union is you a member of?
So Tom and I just differ on that.
Yes, perhaps he was further to the left than you were, and yet you've called him biased, etc. If you were of the opinion that Sir Tom could not be objective and should be sort of removed himself from the investigation, why didn't you say so at the outset of the investigation? Why did you wait until the report was finished before making that point? And isn't it the case in reality you knew that Sir Tom, as a lawyer of 40 years' experience and the longest serving, I think this is correct, Chief Inspector of Constabulary, would be entirely independent, objective through, and it was only when you saw his provisional conclusions that you were concerned and thought you'd start to make claims of bias. Is that right?
No, that isn't right. We always thought when Sir Steve wrote to the Home Sec and she appointed Sir Tom that there was a political hatchet job. I wasn't aware at the time that while I was losing confidence in the Commissioner, the former Chief Inspector, then Chief Inspector, was being invited to supper. I wasn't aware of that then. But, you know, the issue is, I think we've seen from the report important salient facts ignored by Sir Tom and bias in his report.
Right. I think you deserve a response to that, Sir Tom.
Well, it's not a political hatchet job. When I was appointed to this, I expected to come to the opposite conclusions than the conclusions I did come to. But I can tell the committee that in the 12 years that I've spent in policing, 2 years doing the pay review and then 10 years as Chief Inspector of Constabulary, I've had dinner with the Commissioner of the Met, the former Commissioner of the Met, once, and I've had dinner with the Mayor of London once.
There you go, Mr. Mayor.
Chair, I think Sir Tom should also explain how many hundreds were in attendance when I had dinner with Sir Tom when he lobbied me for an hour and a half to appoint the Commissioner as the Commissioner, and how many people were at the dinner he had with the former Commissioner.
I think
that's not.
That's not
there was not. You and I were sitting side by side, and you asked me.
I was going to ask the question: how many were at his dinner with the Commissioner versus my dinner at the London Government Mansion House?
Well, we heard about it last time, and
Chair,
Sir Tom Windsor specifically.
Chair, I raised the issue of the dinner last time, and you rushed me.
Hang on a minute. Excuse us, gentlemen, one at a time. Assembly Member Desai.
Sorry. Okay. Chair, can I come in?
But I've still got questions,
Okay,
but if you're...
It's about the dinner.
No, you're all shouting, and I just want to take you one at a time. What?
Well, can I put some questions to...
No, I'm still carrying on.
All right, well,
You
can I come in after you
me?
then?
Right,
Chair, you raised the issue of bias, right? You raised the topic of bias, and I think this is a very important question to raise under the heading of bias, right? Of Sir Windsor having dinner with the former Commissioner, right? I think this raises a real question of bias, and I think you should allow us to explore this a bit further.
Right. I think we'll carry on with my questioning. If you
Indeed,
want to talk
there's no
about
bias here
Sir
at all, is
Tom's
there?
dinner with the Mayor and Cressida Dick, you may, when I finish questioning.
Could I just deal with that, because it maybe we can deal with it shortly, because we have
sure.
bigger fish to fry, it seems to me.
Yeah.
As Chief Inspector of Constabulary, I have had dealings with all of the 43 Chief Constables of England and Wales and many, many other Chief Officers. I know all of them. I know all of their predecessors, and I think all of their predecessors. I have had dinner and other social occasions where we've discussed business with very, very many of them. And having dinner with the Commissioner of the Met, actually, I think is absolutely no different. The reality is that she asked me to dinner. We went through this last time. She asked me for dinner to say thanks for 10 years of service, and that was before my commission was established. So the idea that there was some kind of bias. I am not friends with the Commissioner of the Met, and I am not friends with the Mayor of London.
No, okay, thank you. If you want to come back on it when it's your turn, then do. I'll carry on in the meantime. Due process was brought up. On the 16th of November, you referred repeatedly to instances where the Met had failed, and you said over and over again that because of these things, the Commissioner had to go. Your thesis appears to be that it does not matter how you brought that about, she had to be removed from office, and you were going to do that with or without compliance with the process the law requires. In other words, I suppose the end justifies the means. Do you think that that is correct?
That's not my thesis. I mean, you're clearly misrepresenting what I said. At no,
No,
stage.
I'm asking you
Well,
your view.
You said that's your thesis.
Well,
That's your,
I'm
that's your,
asking.
no.
So
Do you accept you said that's your thesis? Do you accept
are you
said that?
disagreeing with me?
Well, I do, but I think
you
you've got
do
to accept.
disagree with me.
You've got to accept. You've just said that is my thesis. If you withdraw that, I can explain the answer. 'Cause it's not my,
Okay, I'll withdraw that.
Right.
You explain the answer.
well, I'm quite clear that I followed due process. So Tom disagrees, and he's entitled to come to that view. But I followed due process. The Commissioner chose not to turn up at the 4 p.m. Meeting. I've explained, and it's in the contemporaneous note, the only record taken at the time, the phrase, the straw that broke the camel back. But there were many opportunities for the Commissioner to address the concerns I had in relation to the response to two things. One is the systemic cultural issues, illustrated by a number of cases, and secondly is how to win back trust and confidence. And to give you a compare and contrast, Chair, about sometimes tense conversations the Commissioner and I had in the public domain and private. A good example is around the Clapham Common Vigil. Around the Clapham Common Vigil on Saturday, the 13th of March, I was quite public in my unhappiness with the Commissioner. I did a tweet in relation to my unhappiness about the way the policing operation on Clapham Common on Saturday the 13th of March, questioning the police. On the Sunday, I asked the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner to come in to see me in City Hall. City Hall was Union Street was City Hall back in February. I didn't brief to the media that Steve and Cress were coming to see me because I wanted to have it out with them in relation to the policing operation the night before. They explained the policing operation. I still disagreed, by the way, with their response. We had an adult conversation, which is what two professionals do. I'm surprised still to this day that the Commissioner chose not to come to the 4 o'clock, it was later moved to 5 o'clock for reasons I can go into, meeting on the 10th of February. Had she come, I don't put it beyond the former Commissioner to persuade me on those two things, because in the past she changed my mind on a number of issues. The Clapham Common one is the one that is best known because it's in the public domain. Both my tweet on the Saturday, 30th of March, and also my statement after my meeting said I'm still not happy with the explanation from the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, but we got on working together because that's what professionals do, and I expected the same to happen on the 10th of February.
Well, I think in the report it does say that Sir Tom thinks that she should have gone to that meeting as well. In fact, Sir Tom, that is in your report, isn't it? I'm pretty sure I remember.
Yes. The policing protocol requires both sides, the local policing body, in this case the Mayor, and the Chief Officer, in this case the Commissioner, to establish a relationship, an open relationship of trust and communication and cooperation. And I think that it was incumbent upon the Commissioner to go to the meeting, even though she had very considerable misgivings about how constructive that meeting was going to be.
Okay, thank you. So if we talk about the compliance with the law forcing the Commissioner's resignation, on paragraph 288 of the report, it lays out clearly the steps which have to be taken by you as the Police and Crime Commissioner for London if you intend to require the Commissioner to resign. So do you accept that your actions and the actions taken by your Chief of Staff by applying heavy pressure on the Commissioner to resign amounted to requiring the Commissioner to leave her post? If you don't, what do you think that sort of those actions, what do you think the effect of those would have been?
Well, firstly, I'd not formed a view, and you're assuming that nothing the Commissioner said at the meeting on the 10th of February would have changed my mind, but also you're assuming that the process we followed was us following the process set out in the relevant section in the 2011 Act. We'd not got to that stage. Had I got to the stage where I'd lost confidence in the Commissioner wanting to execute the statutory process, there's a process set out in the 2011 Act which I would have followed, and that process Sir Tom talks about in his report and gives the relevant sections in his report, which we didn't follow because we didn't get to that process. And I think I've now seen the documentation that MOPAC prepared should that process be followed, which confirms the case that we've not got to that stage yet. And Sir Tom I'm grateful for him doing so, has just repeated the point in his report referencing the policing protocol. I'm still not sure, why there was the bunker mentality. And I just remind the committee of this. On the 10th of February, I was in a visit in the morning. I was in a meeting in the afternoon externally, and the Commissioner was meeting with her solicitor, Chief Constable, Deputy Chief Constable, Deputy Commissioner, and many members of the Met Police Service Human Resources Department. And I think that bunker mentality made them believe there was an ambush. If there was an ambush, it's a strange way of doing it, maybe being on a visit in the morning, a visit in the afternoon external from Union Street, City Hall, and having no external representation present. And so had I decided after the meeting with the Commissioner on the 10th of February that I now want to use the formal process, I'd have used the formal process. And that includes writing, by the way, to the Chief Inspector and so forth. And Sir Tom's helpfully set out in his report the South Yorkshire case, where I think the process was followed. But I make this point. It can't have been Parliament's intention for there never to be a scenario where a police and crime commissioner loses confidence with their commissioner or chief constable. I think the point in this case was a concern, and the commissioner said this, I think her representative said this during the day, that the commissioner thought that her position would become untenable, me simply reaching the conclusion I've lost confidence in her. That can't have been the intention of Parliament. And Sir Tom spends some time in his report rebutting the assertion that de facto means that the Commissioner's got to resign because a Commissioner should be entitled to put across her side of the case. Had I decided after the meeting at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., whatever time we had it, that I wanted to pursue the statutory process, even during the process, it's possible, it must be possible, Parliament must have intended for a police and crime commissioner also to have his mind changed by representation from HMI, by the views of the Home Secretary, or by what the office holder says in response.
Okay, last time you were talking a lot about that you went above and beyond the requirements that are required of you, and you're nodding now, so you obviously still believe that, but it's clear you didn't take any of the proper steps. And yet you say you did compel the Commissioner to resign. So how do you get that? How do you reconcile that?
So the statutory process kicks in. I'll find the relevant section. Might be easier.
Well, you've said that the Commissioner short-circuited the statutory procedure by resigning before you could start the statutory procedure.
So let me explain, Chair. So the statutory process is set out in the 2011 Act,
yeah.
which Sir Tom's got in front of him. Thank you. And so it says before calling upon the Commissioner to retire or resign, MOPAC must give the police officer a written explanation of the reasons, etc. My point being, we've not got to that stage, because in advance of that stage, I was working with the Commissioner in relation to the response to the series of scandals culminating in Operation Houghton. Had it been the stage, and that's my point about over and above, there's no requirement for me to ask a Commissioner to come up with an implementation plan. No requirement for me to meet with a Commissioner on a number of occasions in advance of the 10th of February. no requirement for the Deputy Mayor to speak to the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, no requirement for people in my office to speak to people in the Commissioner's office. I can go straight to Section 48, Section 5. Nothing stopped me doing so. I didn't do that because I didn't think we'd get there. Because I thought we wouldn't need to get there because of the response from the Commissioner. And I prayed in aid last time other examples where the Commissioner and I disagreed, polar opposites, and she persuaded me, I persuaded her, we'd found a third way. Sometimes we disagreed and allowed somebody else to be the arbiter, whether it's the courts or whether it's the Chief Inspector. There's no requirement for me to do those things. I did those things because I believe not just in due process, but we had a healthy, sometimes critical, constructive relationship.
Okay, I'm going to go to Sir Tom, because Sir Tom, you understand the laws around this a lot more than I do, and the amount of pressure that the Commissioner was put under. Could you address that for me, please?
Yes. Well, firstly, in relation to the point that the Mayor has made about the meeting and on the 10th of February, which the Commissioner chose not to do, in paragraph 211 of my report, I accept the Mayor's evidence that he had not closed his mind to accepting amendments to the remedial plan, but the build-up of pressure through the interviews with the Today programme, other public statements, and the actions of the Mayor's Chief of Staff, who must have been acting on the authority of the Mayor for something as important as this, was a very severe intensification of pressure on the Commissioner, which led her to the conclusion that she had no future. In other words, that she was being required to resign. She was given an ultimatum, she was given a few hours to make her decision. The pressure was enormous. And my conclusion, and this is borne out by the legal analysis that I've provided, is that those circumstances amounted to requiring the Commissioner to resign, and that is what she did. And by requiring the Commissioner to resign, the Mayor failed to follow Section 48. The Mayor has said that there was no requirement on him to do a number of things which he had done, but he had done them anyway. I disagree with the Mayor. The Policing Protocol Order 2011 required him to do all of those things and much more. It required him to communicate even more intensively than he did, whether in person, which didn't really take place very much, or through his staff. So the requirements that the Mayor referred to are there in the policing protocol. The Mayor refers to the South Yorkshire case, which is the only case of the forced removal of a Chief Constable in my 10 years, and indeed ever since. That's the only one that ran all the way through its course. And the Divisional Court, in that subsequent judicial review, laid enormous weight and placed great emphasis on the requirements of the policing protocol and how that requires both sides, the chief and the local policing body, to cooperate and communicate. And my analysis was that the cooperation and communication from the Mayor in that fateful period leading up to the 10th of February fell far short of the requirements of the policing protocol. And in extenso, in my report, I explain in what respects I think that the policing protocol was not followed by both the Mayor and the former Commissioner.
Okay, I must allow you to come back on that if you want to, Mr. Mayor.
So the two short points, I mean, we're in danger of repetition, is had I reached the conclusion after the meeting with the Commissioner on the 10th of February that I lost confidence in her, the requirements of the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011 and the Policing Protocol Order 2011 would have kicked in. Unknown to me, MOPAC had taken advice and had those letters ready to go to ensure there was further due process followed. There's been another case, and so Tom knows this case better than I do, at the Avon and Somerset case, where in the end, I think the Chief Constable chose to step aside. That was a decision made for good reasons, I'm sure, by the Chief Constable. But the whole point was that we didn't want to get there because I was hoping that the Commissioner and I would come to some form of agreement. Had it been the case then of course we'd have followed the requirements under the Act and the protocol. In relation to the conversation with the Chief of Staff, which Sir Tom plays a lot of weight to, since we last met, I've gone back and found my diary for the 10th of February. I think there were a number of conversations between David Bellamy and Robin Wilkinson, subsequent to us returning from the second visit of the day. My Chief of Staff was with me for the second visit of the day. It was an external visit, pre-arranged for a long time. Those conversations began at 4 o'clock, the first one at 1:36. That was way after the meeting time. The meeting time was 4 p.m. So it's not the case, as Sir Tom suggests, that an explanation for the former Commissioner not bothering to turn up at the meeting at 4 p.m. was because of various conversations with the Chief of Staff. Those happened after the scheduled time for the meeting at 4 p.m. Only one conversation taking place before then at 1:36, which was the Chief of Staff responding to a text from Robin Wilkinson asking him to ring him. What was happening, though, was at the New Scotland Yard, the Commissioner had gathered, her solicitor and various other people, and that can explain their bunker mentality. No bunker mentality at Union Street / City Hall.
Okay. I mean, having employed people myself for years and years, reading the report felt to me that she was put under such pressure that in any other circumstance it would have been regarded as constructive dismissal. And I think I can remember in the report you refer to constructive dismissal, Sir Tom.
I'd say in paragraph 9A of my report that the circumstances of the pressure which was applied to the former Commissioner were such as to create the conditions for constructive dismissal, which was that she found the approach of the Mayor to be so intolerable that she felt she could not continue. Now, the Commissioner of the Met, like every other police officer, is not an employee. Police officers are not employees of anyone. They hold original office under the Crown. But they are entitled to be treated as employees in certain employment protection respects. But constructive dismissal is a set of circumstances, as I have said, where the person in question feels that it is intolerable. And my conclusions were that the way in which the Mayor and his staff handled things up to the 10th of February, if she had been an employee, would have been a case of constructive dismissal, and in all respects it was. And I also explain in my report what are the circumstances, the legal test for constructive dismissal.
Okay, thank you. Right, just a few more questions from me, Mr. Mayor, then we'll move on. Do you believe in the rule of law and the obligations of the holders of public office to uphold it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I thought you'd say that because obviously you should. As established in paragraph 194 of the investigation report, did you demand that the Commissioner break the law by sacking the remaining Charing Cross officers, something you knew was unlawful?
No, I didn't. Let me respond to that point because it's quite a serious allegation that's been made, and it's been repeated by Sir Tom in his report. The Houghton report is quite an interesting read, and I've taken the trouble of reading it again over the course of the last 24 hours. And it reminds me why I was surprised, and I'm still surprised, that the Commissioner didn't bother getting legal advice in relation to the substantive materials she had and nobody else had besides the IOPC and her. Why do I say that? You just referenced the rule of law. I'll give you a compare and contrast. Sir Mark Rowley becomes Commissioner and discovers through Newsnight, not through the IOPC, through Newsnight, that former officers have been on WhatsApp sending some pretty awful messages. What does Sir Mark do? He doesn't shrug his shoulders and say, well, listen, nothing I can do, Gov. He gets his officers to look into prosecuting those officers under the Communications Act and misconduct in public office, an example of a reforming Commissioner who believes there are systemic cultural issues that need addressing. And when I looked at Houghton, I found examples of office. This is the words of the IPC. Some officers hold discriminatory views. Evidence also suggests that these attitudes may be reflected in their behaviour. That to me is misconduct in public office. I'll give you another example. An officer says on WhatsApp, and I quote, I won't use the same language as the report, I effing, we know what effing means, need to take my bird out once here until next Saturday, then after work, promise to take her out the Friday after, making it up to her from when I backhanded her. That to me is a confession of an assault. I'll give you another example.
Can we go back to...
No, Chair, you asked the question, and it's a very serious question you asked. Let me respond to the question and give me the courtesy, give Sir Tom, to give long answers to a question you've asked. I'll give you another example. In the IOPC report, I've not seen the substantive stuff the Commissioner has. Officer says, and I quote, I had that massive fight with my bird because she found out I'd been out on the piss with this girl who's a high-class hooker a couple of weeks ago. Ha, ha, ha. Officer 1.
Yeah,
Make friends with high-class hookers. Officer 2. I had one in Watford from out of work, used to F her all the time.
Mr. Mayor, we all accept that whatever was in those WhatsApp correspondence...
You missed the point, Chair.
No, I don't think I am.
Well, what's the point?
We're all accepting that what happened there was wrong.
No, that's not the point. So the point is...
Well, you needn't read them all out. We all accept that those...
I mean, you can't censor what's in a report.
But bring it back if you would.
Well, no.
Bring it back if you would.
Chair.
It's outrageous.
No,
I mean, try and
what
be...
is outrageous about... What is
out?
outrageous about this? We're trying to bring it back to what's actually in the report.
Chair, I want to know why you keep curtailing the Mayor and answering the questions. Can you be please impartial about this whole matter?
Well, I just want to keep it to
Can
the
you
subject.
please allow the Mayor the freedom and the choice to answer the questions answered? And rather than acting in a biased way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you're coming back into the subject, that's fine. Because last time, when you at the Police and Crime Committee on the 16th of November, you deflected all the questions by saying your purpose was to persuade the Commissioner to obtain legal advice about judicial reviewing of the decisions of the IOPC and the misconduct panels, which had heard the officers' discipline cases.
I'm in the process of giving you examples of prima facie evidence, not just of misconduct, disciplinary offences, but also potentially of criminal offences. I appreciate you don't like what I'm reading out because
it's fine. We will go back to the Baby P case, but if you want to continue on this, carry on.
There's another quote from an officer who says, and I quote, and this is a WhatsApp message in his own name, when I was on roads, ROIDS, I needed it every hour. That's when he was with the prostitute. And the IOPC report confirms ROIDS is a common abbreviation for anabolic steroid use. So here is an officer confessing through WhatsApp the use of anabolic steroids, using sex workers. Example of officers saying that they act in a discriminatory way. Examples of other criminal behaviour.
Yes.
And the Commissioner is taken at face value the IOPC report. Unlike her, I've not got the material in front of me. She has, the Deputy Commissioner has, and the point I was making to the Commissioner is you should be surely getting legal advice about the options open to you. And she'd closed her mind to getting legal advice because my view was, just on a prima facie reading of the learning report, that there appeared to be evidence to justify further interrogation, further investigation. And the compare and contrast in relation to Sir Mark Rowley with a Newsnight investigation, by the way, is he made further inquiries, which led to those former officers being investigated for criminal offences. The former Commissioner was very happy with a fait accompli, and I think that merited further investigation from the Commissioner. That's the point, not about sacking officers. I never said sack officers.
Well, certainly...
It'll give Sir Tom a chance to respond.
Certainly Sir Tom was told There's no point being sarcastic at me, Mr. Mayor. Sir Tom was told that you actually that you actually asked that all the Charing Cross officers were sacked. That is what the Commissioner told Sir Tom. That's correct, isn't it, Sir Tom? Well, there are two of you, Mr. Mayor. It's right that I asked both of you.
I think there's a short point to make. The Mayor carried out an investigation over 4 months. I interviewed as many people as I could possibly, including all the people involved in the 2nd of February meeting and the process, the 2nd of February to the 10th of February. The Mayor says that I make allegations in my report. No, I don't. I make findings of fact.
Okay. It's been shown that you told the Commissioner, or this is what Sir Thomas picked up, that she should do as Ed Balls had done in the Baby Connolly case, report paragraph 68-69. In paragraph 197, it says you denied having tried to persuade the Commissioner to act beyond her powers by sacking the Charing Cross officers. Sir Tom has described this as unconvincing denial on your part.
Is that a question?
Have you got any comment?
Yeah.
I don't need an echo, thank you, colleagues.
I've got plenty of comments if you'll allow me this time to finish.
Well, I do allow you to finish, as you've witnessed before.
Sorry, is it, do you have a chance to
You were
question?
about to
Okay.
speak, I thought.
So there's only one minutes of a meeting that I've got. Only one note taker during the course of the 2nd of February meeting. That is an accurate record of the meeting. It's 4 pages long. Yes, issues there raised about my concern about the lack of disciplinary action against the officers. No reference in relation to sacking officers as suggested by Sir Tom's findings. I'm quite clear in relation to my concern, and I'm still concerned that the former Commissioner not just didn't turn up to the meeting on the 10th of February, but I think it's okay for there to be no further exploration of the officers when she's got evidence, she as a serving officer would know this, of prima facie criminal offences being committed, not taking it further. And that 2nd of February meeting was me interrogating the police's response to the IOPC report, the straw that broke the camel's back, on the back of a series of other scandals, where again the response from the Commissioner was lacklustre, to say the least. And so what the only minutes that you've got of the 2nd of February say is a direct contradiction to the evidence believed by Sir Tom of the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner and the Assistant Commissioner. We discovered last time that the former Assistant Commissioner made a note after the event, which again Sir Tom paid huge credence to, presumably because it's written by a uniformed officer, a police officer, rather than by a chief of staff who, according to the words even of Tory members of this Assembly, is methodical and pays attention to detail. So the inference that somehow that the note of the meeting on the 2nd of February, the only one taken at the time, is inaccurate or somehow partial, is, I think, an unfounded one.
Right, Sir Tom, do you want to come back?
We are going over ground that we went over before. I have made findings. The Mayor is not correct when he says there was only one contemporaneous note. Robin Wilkinson, who was a senior member of the Met, made very detailed notes from the accounts that he had gathered, and then Assistant Commissioner Helen Ball gave me oral evidence of her very, very clear recollection. I'm not surprised that Mr. Bellamy, in making his note, which the Mayor describes as contemporaneous, which I don't doubt, that he omitted the fact that the Mayor, as I have found in my report, had pressed the Commissioner to act illegally.
The problem
Why would he do that? That would become a part of the official record that the Mayor pressed the Commissioner to break the law. I don't think the Chief of Staff would want that on the record. I think his note is incomplete, and therefore I rejected his assertion that it was complete, because I had oral evidence from 2 people at the time, and they were very, very clear in their recollection, not because they were police officers, but because they were startled that the Mayor of London, a public office holder of very considerable seniority, could behave as he had. It's not something you forget.
The problem is Sir Robin wasn't at this meeting.
Robin Wilkinson made his notes from the accounts given to him immediately afterwards. But Helen Ball and Cressida Dick were at the meeting, and their recollections were very, very plain. I had to evaluate the evidence, as we mentioned at the very beginning. I had to evaluate the evidence in its totality, its credibility, its reliability, its weight, its corroboration from other sources, and all the rest of it. The reality is that in interview on the 17th of August, Sophie Linden, the Deputy Mayor, said that she could recall that the Baby P. Ed Balls case had been mentioned in the meeting immediately after the one-to-one meeting with the Mayor. And the Mayor gave me evidence that he couldn't remember whether he or Cressida Dick had raised the Baby P case. And in paragraph 77 of my report, I give detailed analysis of why I believed the Commissioner and not the Mayor. I couldn't believe both of them because they were saying the opposite things.
Why would the Deputy Mayor have remembered Ed Balls being mentioned in that meeting?
Well, as I explained last time, and in answer to the question posed by Sir Tom at our meeting, I do recollect, because I know Ed Balls' reference to Baby B. The point about the meeting after, and by the way, the Deputy Mayor did not say, as has been inferred, that I asked the Commissioner to sack all the officers. There was reference to Baby P, but not about sacking the officers. What's also been confirmed is that the contents of the meeting, which wasn't one-to-one, were very similar to the meeting that was one-to-one. If it's the case, as Sir Tom is now suggesting, that the Deputy Mayor said that I should sack the officers, why didn't the Deputy Mayor say that, or anybody else?
No,
And what's clear now, we've discovered for the first time, is that Sir Tom is relying upon a note made by Robin Wilkinson, who wasn't there, based upon a version of events given to him by Cressida Dick and Helen Ball. That shows the weight Sir Tom's given to people employed by the Met Police Service.
You go first, Sir Tom. That's not how I understand it.
The weight of evidence was the oral evidence from Helen Ball and Cressida Dick in relation to what they had heard in the meeting at which they were present. These are findings of fact. I can understand that the Mayor is uncomfortable with these findings in fact, but they are findings in fact. The Mayor says, I suggest certain things have happened. No, I have found that certain things have happened. My job is, was as an investigator, to make findings in fact and then to analyse them and come to conclusions. And that's what I did.
Okay. I won't press on that anymore, because if colleagues want to. After you behaved as you did on the in February 2022, forcing the resignation of the Commissioner, were you surprised that the executive of the Metropolitan Police Federation unanimously passed a motion of no confidence in you, Mr. Mayor?
When you say when you behaved as you did, what do you mean?
You were on the news, saying, putting her on notice, making her feel, basically all the things that have come out in the report, showing that that she was put under intolerable pressure.
Well, that wasn't the reason why the chairman of the Police Federation made his declaration. But no, I wasn't surprised by what the chairman of the Police Federation said. And I note that all the officers I referred to in the series of scandals are all supported by the chairman of the Police Federation, so I'm not surprised at all.
Okay, I'm going to let other colleagues come in now. Assembly Member Pigeon.
So, sorry, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry,
I was next
excuse
in the
me.
I
list.
do apologize. No, but this is about the dinner. You said you'd bring me in after you?
Yeah, but
Yes,
we-
you're on the list.
Well, I think it just follows logic.
No,
Okay,
it
fine.
No.
It's not how we
Assembly Member
We
Pigeon.
divided up beforehand. I've got some specific questions based on the summons documents we have, but also just picking up from the transcript from last time, things I'd like some clarification. So, Mr Mayor, the IOPC letter that was sent to MOPAC on the 17th of September about Operation Hotton, which we have now put in the public domain and is referred to on page 21 of Sir Tom's report. The last time when I questioned you, you said nobody in MOPAC or City Hall was aware of the details, the systemic cultural issues, until the 27th of January. But this letter, so do you still stand by that?
Yeah, so the details that are the content that lead to that conclusion weren't known to MOPAC until MOPAC got the report. That was the 2nd of February, the Friday before. So the letter you've seen gives no detail of the WhatsApp messages, but also you'll note on page 1 of the forward by Sal Nassim, he mentions, and his report is dated February 22. Although the matters we investigated occurred 3 years ago, we know through our independent investigations the communities we engage with and concerns raised by officers and the wider public that these were not isolated incidents. So not historic, not isolated. Also, not known to the MOPAC officer was the details as set out in the learning report. The chair found uncomfortable the prima facie criminal evidence that I referred to because it embarrasses the former commissioner and the deputy commissioner and Sir Tom. But in fact, the reason why it's important for me to have read that out is because that wasn't in the letter sent by the IOPC to MOPAC. Those were recommendations, and comments were asked for on the recommendations. MOPAC weren't shared and aren't shared routinely for obvious reasons. Yes. Details of investigations, because for good reasons that's probably breaching.
And I accept, absolutely, you did not have that detail. That's quite clear, and you've read out a handful, and it is so shocking even to hear it again today. But actually, this letter still contained a lot. It said in it, and surely alarm bells for the head of MPS oversight must have here. Allegations relate to bullying, harassment, having sex on duty, domestic assault, misogynistic behaviour, drug use, use of steroids, domestic abuse, messages exchanged between officers that were often highly sexualised, violent, discriminatory, a culture of toxic masculinity, sexual harassment, misogyny. And it actually says in this letter, the evidence could bring the police service into disrepute and undermine public confidence in the Met. So this officer, the head of MPS Oversight, received this in September 2021. They may not have that detail, but that would have rung huge alarm bells. How was this escalated by MOPAC? When were you informed, at least of this detail in the letter?
So MOPAC had conversations with the IOPC about making the recommendation more specific, because the recommendations were general. And if I go to the meeting on the 2nd of February, you'll see from that also that we still hadn't had the materials shared with us for good reasons. You can't share materials to do with a potential conduct case with MOPAC, and I'm not criticising the MPS or IOPC for being improper. So we were aware about the generalities. We're aware routinely. So this week I'm aware of a number of misconduct cases against officers. We're not giving the details of specific cases for obvious reasons. So we know there are problems. That, by the way, postdates other series of scandals. So that postdates Bieber and Nicole. That postdates Sarah Everard. So that's not the first evidence we've got of cultural systemic issues.
The contents in there from IOPC saying those things. This person, who's probably quite senior, head of MPS Oversight, must have escalated it. Were you informed? We've got another load of scandals coming. We don't know the exact detail, but this is what we do know.
Yeah, the Deputy Mayor was aware.
Deputy Mayor was aware.
Yeah.
And had she then briefed you?
Details, not specifics. So we don't know specific until 2nd of February.
But we knew there was something serious coming down the line.
Yeah, by the way, there are a number of serious things coming down the line even now, and so it's often the case. What we weren't aware of up until the Friday before the 2nd of February was the details. We weren't aware there were potential criminal actions. We weren't aware it's not isolated. We weren't aware they're not historic, and so forth. The detail are in the learning report, and I made a point and the IOPC weren't always going to have a learning report the way they did. And when you speak to the director, Sal Nassim, it was quite late in the day where he decided to publish verbatim the WhatsApp messages. And I've made this point to him and I've thanked him. Had he not published those, disturbing though they are, I'm not sure if people would have realised the scale of the problems. There are certain things that we aren't allowed to see, and I'm not criticising the IOPC for not sharing those with us.
But this letter, MOPAC's asked to formally respond to it, and you've described it of that. Are we able to see that response, please?
I'm sure we can.
If not, we might want to consider summonsing it. If you could commit to providing that would be really helpful. Thank you. It seems to me that if this sort of letter's coming through routinely, it's how you've got an escalation.
I think the other
and also, it's the September. This came through in the September when you've just renewed Cressida's terms contract for a couple of years. Surely this would have had even more alarm bells ringing about whether that was the right thing to do.
You'll have seen the contents of the correspondence between the Home Secretary and I in relation to post-pandemic, the importance of stability and experience in the Met Police Service, and also the Home Sec's made this point, so I'm not breaching confidences now, the lack of other suitable candidates, as she's disclosed in her letter, and the importance of working together towards suitable candidates going forward to take over from the Commissioner. So there are other issues, and both the meeting in September, conversations that I had with the Home Secretary, we did talk about concerns in relation to culture, and the Home Sec referenced the over-defensiveness of the former Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner. And the January meeting, my version of events, the letter from the Home Secretary confirmed this, so Tom didn't speak to her, is that the January meeting were just about the issues that we were focusing on, the VRU, bringing violent crime down, violence against women and girls, and those issues. We had made really good progress under the former Commissioner.
So Tom, did you want to comment on that? I've got a couple of other points I want to just get clarity on.
Yes, thank you. The Mayor has made a remark that I am in some way embarrassed by his evidence. I'm not in the least bit embarrassed by the findings I've made. The Mayor refers to page 2 of the IOPC report, and Sal Nassim, who was the regional director, says that although the matters we investigated occurred 3 years ago, we know through our independent investigations the communities we engage with and concerns raised by officers in the wider public, these were not isolated incidents. That's exactly what it says. Let's be clear. The IOPC's regional director was not talking about just the Met. We have seen recently cases of WhatsApp messages of a really offensive and disturbing nature, just as offensive and disturbing as the Charing Cross ones in the case of West Midlands Police, and I am aware of others in other forces. So the IOPC, I think we're talking about the whole of the police service, not just the Met. I fully accept that the specifics of the WhatsApp messages in the Charing Cross case were not known to the Mayor until very late in January, when they had a few days' notice of the IOPC report that came out on the 1st of February. MOPAC did know quite a lot about the IOPC's cases in relation to the 14 officers of Charing Cross. In paragraph 191 of my report, I say MOPAC had been aware of the misconduct proceedings involving the 14 for several years. These events had been reported. These events had been reported, not the specific WhatsApp words, but the fact that they were about homophobia, misogyny, domestic violence, and all the other things. These events had been reported in national newspapers in April and May 2019. So it's not as though the Mayor and MOPAC got the IOPC report in February 22. It came as a complete surprise. They knew that very serious cases were taking place, and indeed they knew, because they get regular reports of the misconduct proceedings taking place. Not the precise details, I fully accept, but they knew that material of an extraordinarily offensive and serious nature had been communicated amongst some officers.
Just to say, a lot of what Sir Thomas said is I don't disagree with. I mean, we often are told about the number of misconduct cases, and I'm afraid there are lots of them in the Met Police Service. We're also told some are very serious. We're also told some involve more than one officer. We've never seen until we received this report, and that includes MOPAC, the Deputy Mayor, the officer you referred to, the substance The only other case we've seen some substance is the Stephen Port murders. We got some of the details there. And for good reasons. I mean, I'm not criticising the lack of details there. It was only the week before the 2nd of February that anybody in MOPAC was aware. I don't want to use the word colour in relation to the colour of the complaint, but the sort of the detail and the seriousness in relation to some of the stuff that was said. And that was late January. I think that the Friday before the 2nd of February.
But even that September letter, my goodness, if I had received that, I would have been
There are other
worried.
examples, though. I've got to say this. So I mean,
There's lots more examples.
In the Met Police Service, there, I'm afraid, Sir Tom is right. There are examples around the country as well. It's not just a Met Police issue. I would argue we're ahead of the curve in relation to, the sunlight being the best disinfectant. But I don't want you to be left with the impression this case is the only example of, misconduct that would cause concern to you and I. That's taking place in the police service.
Let's just pick up on the legal advice point. You talked extensively about Mark Rowley and Newsnight and so on. But I asked you last time whether you had gone and taken your own legal advice. Given what you've said, have you or Mark Rowley taken any legal advice now on any of these?
So when I left the last meeting, I asked the office, and we have written to some months ago in February 2022. We wrote to the IOPC to ask for further information because we haven't got the information to make an assessment, and we're still awaiting those details from the IOPC. And that request was made some time ago in February 22, so it's not recently since Sir Mark Rowley took over, and we're still awaiting some of that information from the IOPC.
Okay, that might be pursued. Let's
just on that point, sorry, Caroline.
Yeah.
The meeting on the 2nd of February, the only meeting made contemporaneously, note of the meeting, does say on that page that the Deputy Commissioner is willing to share some of the information that we don't have. We didn't follow that up with him because things moved on.
Yeah, that makes sense now. Thank you. Right, two more just specifics. Draft letter to Her Majesty's Inspector and what would have been to the then Commissioner. We're not allowed to go, obviously, into the detail of those. But your office, MOPAC, had drafted up these letters, which would have been the first step if you had gone down that process. Who instructed MOPAC to spend considerable time? I mean, these are lengthy letters. Yeah. That one of the directors would have drafted. Who instructed them to start that work? Yeah,
the first I saw them was last week. The Chief of Staff wasn't aware of them either. This is MOPAC, and I know the PCC sees the Chief Executive regularly. I suspect it may be the Chief Executive. And it's prudence on her part in relation to planning for that possibility.
So your Deputy Mayor didn't speak to her and say, I think it might be wise to produce something?
So I can't answer on who gave instructions. I don't want to mislead the committee. What I can say is that neither Chief of Staff or I saw these until the summons.
It's just who had asked, though? Your Chief of Staff, given he was so involved, maybe he said, could you perhaps get on with this in case we need it?
No, but it doesn't surprise me that MOPAC have done this work. But the point I'm making is no instructions from me in relation to doing this work. I mean, MOPAC are incredibly good and efficient, so it doesn't surprise me at all. They've done this work. We didn't need to do this because, obviously, the Commission decided not to turn up. I suspect that they were present at the meeting on the 2nd of Feb. They knew there's a possibility, of course, that the Commissioner can persuade me in relation to the 10th of February. I've not asked the question, by the way, whether such a letter was prepared in the meeting I had with the Deputy Commissioner in March post the vigil. I suspect there wasn't. Because
do you think the atmosphere at the time suggested to MOPAC perhaps we ought to get this ready in case the Mayor decides to go down this route?
The phrase I used at the meeting on the 2nd of February, it's in the note made by Dave Bellamy's, is Hoston is the straw that broke the camel's back. And and so MOPAC wouldn't have been ignorant of the fact that it is the straw that broke the camel's back, as far as I'm concerned. So I think the phrase is in the note of the meeting. The Mayor said he was concerned that the findings of Houghton would be the straw that broke the camel's back regarding public confidence, and it goes on. And so it doesn't surprise me that MOPAC did that work.
So, Tom, what's your take on MOPAC spending considerable time doing that piece of work? Do you think they assumed it was about to be used?
Well, I have not seen the papers that they were getting ready. there have only ever been 2 cases of the forced removal of a chief constable invoking the statutory procedure in my almost 10 years as Chief Inspector of Constabulary. I can tell you that both of those cases, and the first step is to send the papers to the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, were documents of some considerable detail with many annexes and pieces of evidence. So there were, very substantial things, great big A4 ring binder, to make the PCC, in that case, the Police and Crime Commissioner's case for wanting to starting the process to force the removal of the chief. And of course, before those documents can be drafted, whoever is drafting them, and it will usually be a lawyer, of course, but not only, the person who's drafting them needs to know why. Why the forced removal is going to be sought. You can't really get started until you know why. And therefore, I find it curious that the Mayor says that he had formed no concluded view to the point where, I hope I'm paraphrasing him correctly, that they would have had adequate instructions. In fact, I think the Mayor said last time, and he'll correct me if I'm mistaken, that last time he said he didn't know that work was taking place, even though that was the 10th of February. That's a very substantial piece of work. What the Mayor was prepared to do, because Mr. Bellamy told Robin Wilkinson this, was to make a public statement on the evening of the 10th of February saying that he had lost confidence in the Commissioner of the Met. Now, if the drafting of the relevant legal papers under Section 48 was at such an embryonic stage because the drafters didn't know what the Mayor wanted or they didn't know why the Mayor was going to force the removal, then to be prepared to urgently make this statement without the papers having been ready, I think is another instance of the Commissioner being put under intolerable pressure, because the statement would have been made, but she would not know, because the Mayor hadn't even seen the first draft of the papers, why. I make the point in paragraph 214 of my report that never, from all the evidence I've seen over the long investigation we did, there has never been any personal criticism of the conduct of the Commissioner. And therefore, I think those drafting those papers would be in some considerable difficulty as to why the Commissioner had to go and why a statement had to be made so urgently. But those are matters that I can only speculate about. The Mayor knows what was in his own mind.
Mr. Mayor.
So Tom can have it both ways. On the one hand, he's alleging that I didn't follow due process, and the process that I followed wasn't in keeping with the 2011 Act. Unbeknown to me, had I reached the conclusion that I lost confidence in the Commissioner, MOPAC had begun work on the process under the statutory scheme set up by 2011. His now comment is that was defective and should have had more detail. Look, I'm not sure what work MOPAC had done at the time in real time, and now that they started doing work. I was quite clear, though. I'd not formed a view, but had the Commissioner come to that meeting and not persuaded me, she could address the 2 issues that I had in relation to systemic cultural issues and trust and confidence. That would be the straw that broke the camel's back in relation to my lack of confidence in her ability to address those issues in light of the series of scandals we had. So hypothetically speaking, in a sort of sliding doors type scenario, had that been the case, what would have happened, I suspect, is I'd have sat down with MOPAC subsequently, and there was lots of interest. We mentioned last time, if you remember, Caroline, every media visit the Commissioner did or I did was taken over by this. And at some stage, I'd have had to make the point that I've now lost confidence in the Commissioner. That's not to say the Commissioner hasn't got a chance to respond to the statutory process. The Chief Inspector's not got a chance to say, actually, you've not got enough reasons to lose confidence, and nor the Home Secretary. So one of the things that I think is worth understanding is not a fait accompli, a PCC losing confidence in his or her Commissioner, or that a Chief Constable or a Commissioner can't, through the statutory process, persuade the PCC that they shouldn't lose their job. What I was hoping was going to happen we'd have the meeting at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and we'd come to a resolution which would address my concerns about her response to the series of scandals culminating, in Houghton. Or if we didn't, we would, find a way forward. Could be the statutory process if the Commissioner wanted to stay, as she's entitled to, or it could be, in that hypothetical sliding door scenario, her decide to step aside. Her resignation statement makes clear that she's of the view, and I think Sir Tom confirms this in his report, that she was of the view that if she didn't have the confidence of the Mayor, she couldn't stay on in her job. If that's the case in every scenario, it begs the question, what is the point of the statutory process set out in the 2011 Act?
Well, it's realpolitik versus the process, and I understand that, but seems to me your MOPAC officers must have thought it could well go to us needing the process for them to spend that time. I had one quick final question just from last time about the plan, the specific plan, the letter that the former Commissioner wrote to you, and that was what the meeting was going to be about. In the last meeting, you stated the plan she'd sent me was not good enough. My office had let her know it was not good enough. And so the idea of the meeting was for us to work through what needed to happen. However, from Sir Tom's report, we hear that the Commissioner had asked for feedback on multiple occasions. And none was received, whereas you almost imply that, you told her it wasn't good enough and so on. The Deputy Mayor said she didn't even know what the Mayor thinks. So what went wrong here in communications? What specific feedback was actually sent to the former Commissioner to help her prepare for this meeting, which she then chose not to attend?
So the timeline is very important. So on the 2nd of February, we meet. And on the 2nd of February, David Bellamy's notes confirm that the two relevant points are in relation to the Commissioner said she would appreciate insight from the Mayor's team into public views and possible communication approaches. So the first thing was that's the comms. So it's not a joint plan, but she wants help in relation to comms. Then the second reference is towards the end of that meeting, where the Commissioner says, the Commissioner asked for help with a new communication strategy, something eye-catching and different, and suggested holding a seminar to devise a new comms strategy. So what we've not said is there'll be a joint plan. What we've said is the Commissioner goes away and does a plan, but she has, in that meeting on the 2nd of February, said, look, I'm paraphrasing, I could do some help with comms.
Yeah.
Right? What happens then is the next day, Sophie Linden meets with the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, assuming the meeting is going to talk about the response to my concerns about the series of scandals culminating in Houghton. The Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner proceed with the normal agenda items and spend just 5 minutes talking about this response. And I think in Sir Tom's report it does say, I think, that Sophie Linden reinforced the importance of the development of the required plan, and she asked that a meeting on the 3rd of February she suggests that meeting instead be a focus on trust and confidence, and the Commissioner said trust and confidence only needs to take 5 minutes in the meeting and doesn't need to take much more time than that. Over the weekend, further conversations between the Deputy Mayor and representatives from the Commissioner's office, and then on the Monday, I did media in relation to mentoring. I didn't want to tell the media that the plan that had been sent over to me on the Friday before was inadequate in relation to addressing the two things I wanted to mention. I didn't telegraph to the media that my meeting with the Commissioner was on the 10th of February, because I didn't want an ambush of the Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, and also that to be the sort of deadline that the media knew about. The intention was for us to discuss it at the 10th of February, but in advance of that...
There's no feedback in advance?
No, because we're going to discuss it at the 10th of February. What happens then is we receive a letter at 12:58 on the 10th of February from the Commissioner, where she sets out a number of things that she would like to be reassured about in advance of the meeting. As I've explained, that day I was out in the morning on a visit, out in the afternoon on a visit, and I was still expecting to meet with her later on and to talk through those things. The Commissioner would not have, by the way, accepted me interfering in operational matters in relation to policing, but I think what was missing was a plan from the Commissioner to address the twin issues, how you address the cultural systemic issues in the Met Police Service, and how you win back trust and confidence of the public.
But no specific feedback was given. And so, Tom, that's your understanding, is it?
Yes. The only substantive feedback came on the day the Commissioner indicated her intention to resign. And I take issue with the Mayor, as you might expect, in relation to his account that the plan was going to be a joint plan. I refer the committee to paragraphs 70, 72, 75, 85, 95, 98, 201 and 206 of my report.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be very brief because it's obviously important we get on to part 2 to look to the future and the recommendations, which is what this meeting was originally called for. But I do just have one thing that I just want to check into, which is these football analogies. Paragraph 74 in Sir Tom's report, one or other of us is going to end up being substituted, and the phrase 5-0 down at half time, and Sir Tom says that the Commissioner told you that she understood the phrase as a threat to her continuation in office. And then at paragraph 75, Sir Tom, you say the Mayor, one of your queries is whether the Mayor threatened the Commissioner with removal in his substitution reference. And then on paragraph 78, you conclude that you consider it more plausible that the Mayor's choice of language was intended as a veiled threat if actions were not taken. Now, I just want to kind of just go back to where these two football analogies came from, and I just wonder if Mr. Mayor, if you could share, could just explain a bit more about this language.
Sure. So they came from the meeting on the 2nd of February, where the first time we met after the Houghton report was made public. That's where the reference came from.
And do you did you see them being connected, or did you see them as being were they two separate?
No, the Commissioner just didn't appear to understand the scale of the problem we had. We're talking about a seminar sometime in the future to discuss comms. I've just read out what appeared to me prima facie criminal offences, systemic cultural issues, overt sexism, racism, discrimination, homophobia, and so forth. And we're talking about a seminar sometime in the future. She had 2 years to go, I had 3 years to go, and I said, look, by the time we get to the root cause of this, there's a danger of both of us being substituted.
What had you been discussing this with the Home Secretary in this period of time?
Yes, so the Home Secretary and I had a number of conversations. So we had a conversation back in... So if you remember, there were reporting restrictions in the in the Wayne Couzens case. He's the serving police officer found guilty of murdering Sarah Everard. Those reporting restrictions meant we weren't aware of the full circumstances around either Couzens or some of the other officers until late in the day. So the Commissioner's contracts extended after the Sarah Everard murder, but before full details are made public. And so what happens is the Home Secretary and I have a conversation after the verdict comes out, so, and we also discover there's another police officer who has been charged with very serious offences, and by the way, we're still now learning about more offences. Your point about how much does the MOPAC know, often we don't know until the same time as you. So on the 1st of October, I wrote to the Home Secretary in relation to my concerns that arose from the reporting restriction being lifted in Couzens. On the 3rd of October, and by the way, I spoke to the Commissioner that weekend. She at no stage mentioned to me about the other officer. I discovered later on, when it broke in the media, about the other officer. My office was informed just in advance of that. So on the 3rd of October, when I'm told about another officer being arrested and charged, I'm disappointed the Commissioner's not told me this. When I spoke to the day before on the Saturday, I wasn't told this. So on the Sunday, I speak to the Home Secretary and I say to the Home Secretary, I think the Met Police Service have got themselves in a bad place. They're too reactive. They are too slow. I subsequently speak to the Commissioner. This is Sunday night. And the words I use with the Commissioner is last chance saloon. This is Sunday, the 3rd of October. And I then spoke with the Home Secretary again on the 4th of October, Monday. It was during Conservative Party conference. I know this because the Home Secretary spoke to me in the morning, and she also was having doubts about the Commissioner. She then went to have breakfast with the Prime Minister, who'd been speaking to the Policing Minister. I said to the Home Secretary, my own confidence had been shaken, and she said that we should work together to hold the Commissioner to account.
What about in that period, though, around the 2nd of February, did you have any contact with the Home Secretary then?
So my office was in contact with the Home Secretary's office. The Home Secretary was aware. I was meeting the Commissioner on the 10th of February, and someone from the Home Sec's office was in contact with someone in my office in the afternoon of the 10th of February.
And what was the Home Secretary? Did the Home Secretary have the same concerns as you at that point?
I didn't speak to the Home Secretary on the 10th of February. I don't want to put words into it.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. That's all I want to ask.
Okay. Sir Tom, was there anything you wanted to pick up on that?
Not really. I think we're going over ground that's already in the report. I make the point that the Mayor says that the IOPC report revealed criminal offences. I think there was at least one criminal prosecution, but the reality was that the officers in question who were guilty of receiving and not reporting the offensive WhatsApp messages were subject to disciplinary procedure, but they did not meet the threshold of misconduct in public office. The officers who were the authors of the offensive messages were dealt with much more severely, and one has to have regard to the discretion of the prosecuting authorities in question. I am aware of no case where the prosecuting authorities' exercise of discretion has been successfully judicially reviewed, because that discretion is a very wide one. The other point I would like to make is that the plan which the Mayor asked the Commissioner, required the Commissioner to produce, was about much more than communications, and it was a joint plan for the reasons I've explained in my report.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning, Mr. Mayor. Just interested in this question of how you engaged with Sir Tom's report. I was struck by the comment earlier about the press briefing that went out on the same day that his report went out. So is that a normal thing that your office would do, Mr. Mayor, when someone who you suspect or presume to be producing something critical of you, you put out a sort of a press briefing attacking them personally and their credibility?
I've not seen the press briefing.
So the one that's on your desk next to you there that Sir Tom gave you earlier?
I've not seen that.
You're not aware of that?
No.
So you're not aware of your office putting out a press briefing attacking Sir Tom?
No.
Is that the sort of thing that they might do normally, do you think, without your knowledge?
No, I've not seen it, so I don't accept this attacking Sir Tom, so I'll look at it later on and form a view.
So Tom, is the press briefing in question there, is this the one where you were accused of being a Conservative stooge? Is that the same one?
I don't think they quite go so far as to call me a stooge, but they certainly say that I have affections and political affiliations, which I most certainly do not have. It runs to 7 pages. It's not a very good quality document. Whether the Mayor agrees with its contents or not is a matter for him, but I was a little startled to see it, and but I wasn't disturbed.
Sorry, so to be clear, what was the source then of that document? Where did it come from, or who did it come from?
I hope I pronounce his name correctly. A person in City Hall called Njoki Mahiani.
And that's someone who's working in.
That's somebody who works for City Hall.
Office. Okay.
And it contains a quote from the Mayor of London saying it's biased, and conducted by a friend of the Commissioner, attack on London democracy, a complete waste of taxpayers' money, not worth the paper it's written on, etc., etc. And then it has some background to the Winsor Review, and it really is a document of a very poor quality.
So, I mean, I suppose the question on my mind is whether it was deliberately false or whether it was just shoddy. I don't know whether we need to dig into that, but possibly, I don't know whether there's a third option.
Just a really poor piece of work. And
I mean, it's a taxpayer-funded piece of work. I mean, would be the point that I would make. I mean,
it attacks me for the police pay review and so on. I enter into a light moment for the committee's amusement, if you like. But when I did the police pay review, I was attacked in social media and in many other things. And one person, under the veil of anonymity, attacked me as an evil scum Tory pension thief. And my wife at the time said, "How dare they call you a Tory?"
Yes. I'm sure that's the part that really stung.
Even I
mean, Mr. Mayor, I see you're sort of glancing at that document now, and you know the context of it. Does that seem like a proper use of public resource to produce something like that?
I don't know about it, so I don't know if it is a taxpayer source document. I just don't know. So I don't know answer that information. I just don't know about.
I mean, they seem to have a quote from you. I don't know. I mean, I appreciate you do give lots of quotes to lots of people. They seem to have a quote from you to include in there.
I do give lots of quotes to lots of people.
I think that might be something we will pursue outside of this meeting, how that document came to be produced and whether it was wise use of resources. I mean, presumably you would say, Mr. Mayor, if that kind of characterised as a hatchet job, that isn't what City Hall staff should be spending their time on.
You're asking hypothetical questions. I'm not sure where this document comes from, if it's taxpayers' money being used or whatever. I'm not sure if the context are accurate.
I mean, I can see why you don't want to answer a hypothetical question, but it's pretty obvious that that's not what City Hall staff should be spending their time on, isn't it?
Well, you're assuming that's what it says. You've not read it, so why don't you get to read it and then form a view whether it's appropriate or not? I've not read it either.
The meeting on the 2nd, Mr. Mayor, why did Baby P come up in that meeting? At the meeting on the 2nd of February, why did Baby P come up in that meeting?
I'm not sure. Why it would have come up, in what context it would have come up, I don't know.
Because, I mean, on the face of it, it's a completely different case that's not connected in any way. I mean, that was an awful child abuse case. There's, you know, on the facts of the case, the circumstances of what happened, there's no connection between what you were talking about on the 2nd and that case of that.
I mean, you're assuming that I brought it up. I mean, I don't know.
No, I'm not assuming, excuse me, I'm not assuming anything. It is agreed by all parties that it did come up, and I'm asking you, why would it come up?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure in what context it would have come up.
So the assertion is that it came up in the context of the aftermath of the Baby Connolly case, where there was a suggestion from a senior Labour politician that officials should just be sacked and then kind of leave the lawyers to pick the bones out of it.
I mean, the case that is referenced,
pay people off.
The case that is referenced in the notes, which I remember recollecting, and we know it's the case because it's in the media this week, is the case of Superintendent Robin Williams. That's the case I remember mentioning.
Okay,
so I mentioned that case, and it's in the notes in relation to you know, how she was treated by the former commissioner.
Okay.
As a compare and contrast to how these officers weren't treated. So I
obviously
mentioned that case,
okay,
which is in the notes. I don't remember the context of the Baby B case, and it's not in the notes.
So you do remember that it came up, but you just don't remember the context.
Once it was mentioned at the meeting in August, and we talked about it at the meeting with Sir Tom, I do have recollection, and the trigger for me was because I know the reference to Ed Balls, not because of the details of, you mentioned Connolly, but it's the Ed Balls connection with Baby P.
I mean, Sir Tom's conclusion was that the only plausible scenario in which that comes up is in a scenario where somebody is suggesting that people should just be fired without due process and then sort of, as I say, pick the bones out of it later and pay people off. And that's a plausible context in which that would come up. That's the only point of commonality I can see between those two scenarios. Is there another scenario?
I've not looked into it. I mean, I'm happy to go and look into the possible theoretical reasons why it may have come up. That's an inference that Sir Tom has drawn. You know, I can go away and think of other reasons why it may have come up. We've not, for example, gone back to... I've not seen the note referred to by Sir Tom, written by Robin Wilkinson or Helen Balls. That may explain the context, and I'm sure you've seen it. Well, so when you see that note, that may explain the context.
I mean, they make the point that that is what the context was. So I'm putting to you the opportunity to suggest that there was some other context other than it was about just sacking people and paying them off later.
Well, I'm happy for you to show me the documents, and I'm happy to respond to that document.
Well, I think it would be fair to say it's covered in some detail in Sir Tom's report, which I assume you have read.
No, I've not read Robin Wilkinson's notes of the meeting, although he wasn't there, nor have I read former Assistant Commissioner Helen Ball's note of the meeting either. But I'm happy to read those, and if they trigger a memory as a sort of their version of an aid memoir, I'm more than happy to respond.
Okay, Sir Tom. So what were your reasons for reaching the conclusion that you did? I think I've characterised it correctly. That is the reason that came up. What were your reasons why? Obviously, we've heard the mayor with no recollection of why it came up or what context. Why did you?
Well, paragraph 77 of my report explains why I concluded that a baby P was mentioned, because those involved said it was, and why I preferred the account of Helen Ball and Cressida Dick as to the mention of it. There is a note of my interview with the mayor on the 17th of August 2022. This is a note which has been agreed between my secretariat staff for the investigation and the mayor's office. And in paragraph 17, it is perfectly clear that the baby key case was raised, and the mayor said he couldn't remember whether it was he or Cressida Dick who had raised it. In paragraph 77 of my report, I explain in extenso why I believe that A, it was raised, and B, that it was raised by the mayor, and why the mayor raised it. Ed Balls acted unlawfully and required the dismissal of the Haringey Director of Children's Services, Sharon Shoesmith, and the mayor knew of that case. He knows Ed Balls, of course he does. He knows of that case. I think we all know of that case. We also know that in the subsequent decision of the Court of Appeal, Sharon Shoesmith was found to have been constructively dismissed and got a financial settlement of north of £600,000. Now, I did not, and I say in paragraph 77 why, I do not regard it as in any way credible that the Cressida Dick would have raised the baby P case, perhaps saying, Mr. Mayor, I've got an idea, why don't I act unlawfully and sack these 14 officers? Of course, it doesn't bear any further treatment than that. So the baby P case, I've made findings in fact, they're not allegations, I've made findings in fact in relation to what happened, and I think that what did happen in that case on the part of the mayor was probably one of the most disgraceful parts of this whole affair.
So your conclusion is that the discussion of baby P was part of the reason why you reached that very clear finding of fact that the mayor, in your report you concluded, had either requested or instructed the commissioner to behave unlawfully beyond her powers outside of the law and just to sack people without the normal process. Is that correct?
Yes, he didn't instruct the commissioner because he has no power of instruction. But nevertheless, there was heavy pressure in that respect, and the commissioner, for the reasons I've given in my report, very properly said she was not going to do that. She wasn't going to do it because she had no power to sack them. If she had dismissed them, she would have faced multiple claims of unfair dismissal, considerable cost to the London taxpayer in paying out compensation, and significant damage to the morale of probably every member of the Metropolitan Police staff and officers, that their commissioner would agree and give way to political pressure to sack people, some of whom had no case to answer and were innocent of the charges in question, for a political advantage. It's just inconceivable that any police officer would do that, or indeed any chief executive would do that. But those are the findings, in fact, that I have made.
So, Mr. Mayor, you don't accept those findings, in fact, but you don't have an alternative explanation of why BBP came up in that meeting?
No, I don't accept those findings of fact by Sir Tom Winsor.
And you don't have an alternative explanation, though, of why BBP came up?
If you share with me the notes of Robin Wilkinson and Helen Ball, I'm more than happy to look at them.
I mean, we've been over this. This is now the second meeting. We've been over this. There's been an extensive discussion of it. You've had months to think about it, and you can't think of an alternative scenario of why BBP came up.
I make the point, if fresh documents are brought to light which trigger a memory, I'm more than happy to look at them.
Okay, I think perhaps people have reached their conclusion about what they believe happened in that meeting.
I
Thank you,
think,
Chair.
that, if I may just say, the Mayor does have knowledge of the note of my interview with him on the 17th of August, and I refer him again to paragraph 17. That's a note that was agreed between my staff and his staff.
I've not seen Helen Ball's notes, or have I seen Robin Wilson's notes? I didn't know about I didn't know about the existence of a third-hand note until an hour and a half ago.
I don't think that can be correct, because that report, I'm sure that note was mentioned on the 16th of November. I think that's where I learnt of it.
You don't have the Helen Ball note, not of the Robin Wilkinson note.
I see. Is that correct, Sir Tom, that today is the first mention of the Robin note?
No, and I've explained in detail in my report where the sources of, what the sources of evidence are. So it's all there. It's been there since the 24th of August.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sir Tom. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I now go to Assembly Member Desai?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief, bear in mind the time. Sir Tom, can I ask you, when did you first speak to the Home Office about taking part in this review?
I can't remember precisely, but it was, I think, in the last couple of weeks of my term of office as Chief Inspector of Constabulary. I was informed by senior Home Office officials that the Home Secretary wanted me to carry out this. It's not a review, it's an investigation. Carry out this investigation. I can't remember exactly when. I could find the date.
What month was that?
March 2022.
March 2022, because the Home Secretary announced the establishment of this inquiry on the 25th of March and made a statement to the House of Commons on the 28th of March.
That's right.
And you're saying March...
March 2022. So
sometime in March.
Yes, I can find the exact date.
First half of March, or
I think it was. I think it was second half of March, but I'm not certain. But what happened? I mean, I can write to the committee and give you precise dates. But I received word from, I think, the policing director at the Home Office that the Home Secretary wanted me to do this. There was a certain amount of toing and froing as to the drafting of the terms of reference, and only when the terms of reference had been settled and signed did the Home Secretary make her announcement to Parliament on the 25th of March.
So presumably these things do take a few days, a couple of weeks. So I would suggest
it didn't take long. I mean, they're not.
The terms of reference not something that happens overnight. When did you meet the Commissioner for dinner, the ex-Commissioner?
I could find the date.
21st of March, I suggest?
I can't remember the exact date. I could find it, but I can't remember.
I think it was the 21st of March. But it was around that time that discussions were going on with the Home Office.
I can't remember exactly what the date is, but I can certainly find the date.
So in terms of the dinner, I think last time you told us that the Commissioner wanted to thank you for your services, for your work as an inspector.
That's right.
So presumably she invited you for the dinner?
Yes.
Yeah. Where was this dinner?
I've just said I can't remember the exact date. It was in March.
No, where?
Where?
Yeah.
I was at a restaurant in the Strand called the Wolseley.
In what, sorry?
A restaurant in the Strand, not in Strand, Piccadilly, called the Wolseley.
And was anyone else present at this dinner?
There were a lot of people in the restaurant. It was
very
noisy.
No.
It was just no.
Look,
it was only
the two of you.
It was only the two of us. That's right.
And because the Commissioner invited you to dinner in an official capacity, I take it, presumably the Metropolitan Police paid for this dinner.
Well, certainly she paid the bill. I don't know whether she charged it back or not. I didn't pay for it.
Well, I mean, if she charged the Met, it's us the taxpayers, but that's another point. So, how long was this dinner for, roughly? How long were you with her? For this dinner. Very roughly.
I don't know.
An hour, 2 hours?
An hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
Perhaps a little longer.
So, what was the general tenor of the discussion? Say you're with her for around 90 minutes, hour and a half.
We talked about the police.
You talked about police. What did you talk about? What sort of policing issues did you talk about?
As Chief Inspector of Constabulary for 10 years, I've had oversight of 50 police forces and law enforcement agencies. Cressida Dick has very substantial experience
Yes.
in all of those fields. That's what we talked about. We talked about the state of the police, the relations that the police have with the community, the failures of other public services such as the health service to do what they're supposed to do, and the demands on the police which come onto the police as a result of those failures. We talked about counter-terrorism, but not in any confidential manner, and we talked about everything else in relation to the police.
And I mean, did she talk to you at all in any way about the circumstances of her departure, about how she felt?
I think
the
she
politics of policing, politics of small p.
No, we stayed away. We stayed away from those things. We were talking about the police, and we were talking about my 10 years as chief inspector. I'm the longest-serving chief inspector of Constabulary. It's been a great privilege to do that job, and it was a pleasant, sociable event.
But with hindsight, maybe, don't you think in terms of public perception, you were having discussions with the Home Office around about that time, we're not sure of the exact dates, but the 20th of March, the then Home Secretary announces the establishment of this commission. Don't you think that sort of gives a wrong sort of impression in terms of public perception?
I simply cannot remember whether or not I had the dinner before the Home Office approached me to do this investigation. I simply cannot remember.
Sure. Okay. Maybe you could sort of write to us.
I'll find my diary if the Home Office haven't already turned it into ash.
One final point, Chair. When we met earlier this year, you met with some members of this committee. I asked you on what legal basis did the then acting commissioner, Sir Stephen House, have for asking the Home Secretary to commission an inquiry, and you said from memory that any citizen out there could ask the Home Secretary to do an investigation?
Yes.
Right. I mean, I put it to you, I don't think that Joe Plugs out there asks the Home Secretary, he or she probably wouldn't even get a reply from the Home Secretary. So looking at the circumstances now that some time has passed, the then Commissioner brings in Sir Stephen House, who had retired, to be her deputy. She then, as I put it to you, well, my view is that she resigned and was not forcibly removed. He then becomes acting commissioner, and then he then asks the Home Secretary to launch an investigation into his ex-colleague, a very close colleague, over many, many years of policing and working together, to do an inquiry. Again, what sort of, what sort of impression does that leave with the public? It all just seems, people who know one another, and the acting commissioner is then asking the Home Secretary, who then sort of agrees, yes, we must have an inquiry.
Well, as I said earlier, anyone can ask the Home Secretary to set up an investigation.
But they wouldn't even get a reply, I suggest the person out there on the street, the ordinary Londoner.
The Home Secretary receives many letters. I'm sure she replies to some of them. I mean, when I was rail regulator, I received... when I was rail regulator, I received 3,000 letters a year. I didn't read all of them, but I did read some of them and reply to them. But Steve House is a very distinguished senior police officer. He'd been Assistant Commissioner in the Met. He had been Chief Constable of Scotland, and then he was brought into the Met to be Deputy Commissioner. Steve House was not appointed to the Met as Deputy Commissioner by the Commissioner. He was appointed by the Queen. It's a Home Office decision, not a Commissioner decision. Naturally, I'm not aware of any Commissioner. I think I'm not aware of any Commissioner who has been given a Deputy Commissioner that they didn't want. But I may not be quite right about that. I can think of one instance, but it doesn't matter.
I'm just going by press reports of what happened at the time. But again, and I'll leave it at this, Chair, is public perceptions that count. Thank you.
Well, the only point I would make is senior police officers, they all know one another. They meet every month in Chief Constable's Council and so on. They've grown up together. Their professional careers have been developed together. So they know one another very well.
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that his role in asking the then Home Secretary for an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the departure, or I would say the resignation of his colleague,
Well, all I would say...
How would the public out there, perceive things?
The reality is that he was by then the acting commissioner, I think, or was about to be the acting commissioner. He was aware, he can speak for himself, but he was aware that there was very considerable dissatisfaction within the Metropolitan Police and the police service generally about the way in which the commissioner had been forced to leave. And therefore, it may very well be that as a matter of the leader of the Metropolitan Police, on behalf of the 40-odd thousand people under his command, he believed that it was his duty to ask for this investigation to ensure that the facts were established. But he can answer that question.
Perhaps if the Home Secretary, the ex-Home Secretary has been here, perhaps you could have shed more light on things. But anyway, we are where we are, Chair. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I want to go on to section 2, but I've seen Assembly Member Sahota, and then we'll have a break after Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Sir Tom, just following on the question by my colleague, did you say you had the dinner on the 21st of March in the Wolseley?
No, I didn't say I had it on the 20th. I remember the restaurant. I don't remember the date. I can find it, but I
would like you to find. I would like you to find it and write to the committee to tell us when that date was.
I'll be happy.
And also to put it in the context of when the Secretary of State declared the inquiry. But it was about the same sort of time, wasn't it? Broadly speaking.
Broadly, it was in March, but I can't remember the exact sequence.
So you provide us with the exact date. But the question I want to put to you is that you are sitting in the Wolseley on a table of two, you and the Commissioner, when this report has been already declared or about the same sort of time, and you want me and the Londoners to believe that you didn't discuss the circumstances of her resignation.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Look me in the eyes and say that.
I'm looking you in the eye,
and I say I find it incredible, unimaginably difficult to accept.
I think that's outrageous.
But I'll write to the committee with the sequence. I'll write to the committee with the sequence of events. But the reality is, I was once judicially reviewed for having dinner with the Chief Constable of the West Midlands. It went to the High Court. It was unsuccessful.
Clearly, there's an obsession with who has dinner with who here, which I find incredible.
It's about bias, Chair. It's about the concept of bias.
Chair, is this particular dinner because of all the various issues going on around the time?
When there is such a question mark,
it's a question of public transparency, Chair.
Assembly Member, when there's such a question mark over Baby P and the Commissioner possibly having been asked to sack all these Houghton officers, I'm surprised that you are mentioning dinner. But so be it. If that's where my Labour colleagues want to go with this,
Chair, transparency.
Well, I'm sure Sir Tom Winsor will give us the dates that he had dinner in the Wolseley. A very good choice, I must say. Okay, I intend to have a 10-minute break now. So if we could resume at 12:10, colleagues, please. Thank you. Right, we're resuming the meeting of the PCC, and now we're going into the second part of Sir Tom's report. I'm going to start, Mr. Mayor, referring to paragraph 271 of the report. It says that the Commissioner's terms of appointment are, and I'm quoting here, inconsistent with the statutory scheme. It says in paragraph 272 that they refer to the Commissioner as MOPAC's employee. In paragraph 274, it criticises the terms of appointment as going well beyond the relevant legal boundaries by requiring the Commissioner to deliver your police and crime plan, when in reality the Commissioner's obligation is only to have regard to the plan. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think there's been some tidying up of the contract, the letter of appointment, I forget the right phrase, with the new Commissioner. There was no precedent that we could use for the former Commissioner. I'm more than happy for MOPAC to write to you, Chair, to give you an update in relation to improvements made to the appointment of Sir Mark.
Yes, so you accept that it was incorrect?
I accept there are changes and improvements made to the agreement with Sir Mark versus the agreement with the previous Commissioner, which again was different to the agreement with Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe. And I think Sir Tom's highlighted one of the issues of concern he had, maybe two. I think there are other issues that have been addressed in the contract with Sir Mark.
Okay, because paragraph 275 says these terms of appointment are misconceived, which I'm sure you've read. Paragraph 276 criticises you for the use of language of master and servant, of employer and employee, by referring to the Commissioner as someone who, and I'm quoting here, who works for me. I think that was on an interview. It reports that you said on the 10th of February 2022 that Dame Cressida, and I'm quoting, Dame Cressida Dick has offered her resignation, which I have accepted. So really I say to you, Mr. Mayor, do you not understand the constitutional relationship between you and the Commissioner? You are not the Commissioner's employer. Do you understand that the police officers, whatever rank, are not employees? And do you understand that the Commissioner resigns to the Sovereign and not to you?
I'm aware who appoints the Commissioner and who has the ultimate power to get rid of the Commissioner.
Okay. Would you think that this language on your part is indicative of an attitude of superiority and dominance, with the Mayor asserting a right to control the Commissioner in a way which the law in this country has never allowed and does not allow today?
Well, I'm happy to go to the relevant statute in 2011, which gives a huge amount of powers to police and crime commissioners. The Met Police Commissioner is unique in relation to other chief constables, and I accept there are anomalies in relation to the position of Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service. One of them you've mentioned, which is that the Queen appoints the Commissioner, and you know the reference to the Secretary of State. And I think in Sir Tom's report he talks about how ultimately, in fact, the reality is the Prime Minister involved in deciding whether a particular candidate for Commissioner is appointed Commissioner, and I recognise that anomaly.
Okay. Do you regret using language such as "who works for me"?
Not at all. She works for all of us. And the Commissioner's got to have a good relationship with the Mayor. I'm happy to go to the statute. Sir Tom's got a copy of the Act in front of him. I only printed off, I'm afraid, relevant sections last night on my printer. But I'm happy to go through the Act and the Policing Protocol, which sets out the new responsibilities that all Chief Constables have, including the Commissioner, one exception being the City of London, since the 2011 Act. And I think we should, during the course of Part 2, which I thought today was about, go through details of both the protocol, the Act, and also what the most recent statement from the Police Minister on the floor of the House is in relation to primacy of accountability of the Commissioners to the Mayor, not, as Sir Tom suggests, to the Home Secretary. Another example of his bias cloud in his judgment.
No, I think we've established it's not biased, but you seem obsessed with it. And I am referring to Part 2. Paragraphs 271 are within Part 2. At this point, I'm going to go to Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you, Chair. It's taken us 5 hours to get to this point to talk about the future. But I wanted to ask you first, Sir Tom, about just in light of the recommendations and the kind of options that you put forward for resolving some of these matters, what you see as the benefits and weaknesses of the current system of appointment, governance and scrutiny, and yeah, just general thoughts on that, and then I'll come to the Mayor after that.
Thanks. I think your context is the dual accountability to the Home Secretary and the Mayor. As I have explained in my report, as you've seen, for a very, very long time, the Commissioner of the Met was accountable only to the Home Secretary, and the Royal Commission on the Police in 1962 said that that was a sustainable position because London is not just the 609 square miles of the Greater London area. London is a national asset, it's a national and international city, and therefore what happens in London, in all the respects that I've given in part 2, has a very significant effect on the rest of the country. And therefore it makes sense for the Home Secretary, who is accountable to Parliament, and of course the Mayor is not accountable to Parliament, for the Home Secretary to have the primacy that she does. It was only in 2000, when the Greater London Authority Act 1999 came into effect, that the Commissioner had a separate accountability to a London-wide statutory officer. So this model's pretty new. It's only 22 years old. Before, with the 32 boroughs, the Commissioner had no accountability to them, and they were frustrated about that, as I'm sure you all know. But the benefit of the system, it seems to me, is that because the Commissioner of the Met is A, responsible for the police force that covers 25% of all policing in England and Wales, and B, because London is unique for all the reasons I've given, that it makes sense for the Home Secretary to have that primacy. But that is not in any way to diminish or to or anything the importance of the Commissioner being accountable to the Greater London Authority in the person of the Mayor and, of course, the Assembly. But it is a unique system of accountability because of dual accountability, and that has its benefits because the Mayor can deal with the day-to-day policing in the way the Home Office never really did. But at the same time, the Home Secretary can hold the reins in terms of the national picture. That's a benefit. But it also is a weakness in the sense that the Commissioner sometimes can be looking in two different directions, and that's not necessarily the case just because the Commissioner and the Met, the Commissioner and the Mayor are of different political parties, because the relationship between Mr. Johnson and Mrs. May was far from a good one.
And just on that, so that's a really helpful exposition. In the meantime, we've had the introduction of police and crime commissioners in other parts of the country. And so how, in relation to the way that the Mayor's office, as it fulfills that role of PCC, how would you kind of assess the accountability and the governance there?
You mean outside London? It
would be helpful to understand if there are different powers and obviously there are different levels of accountability because others are not accountable to the Home Secretary or share that responsibility with the Home Secretary. But in terms of local accountability, the Police and Crime Commissioner is accountable to the public, and through that I think there's an expectation that officers are therefore kind of able to account for their actions and the way that their forces conduct themselves.
Well, one of the features of the system in London as compared to the system elsewhere in the country is that the Mayor of London, as a Police and Crime Commissioner, is the weakest Police and Crime Commissioner in the country because of the presence of the Home Secretary. So whereas a Police and Crime Commissioner in Dorsetshire can make an appointment of his or her chief constable, the Mayor can't. The Mayor is consulted, but the decision is in the hands of the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister. In terms of removal, whilst the Mayor can remove the Commissioner, he faces a veto from the Home Secretary. A Home Secretary veto does not apply in any other part of the country. So some may regard it as anomalous that the Mayor of London actually has more constraint on him in terms of dealing with the Commissioner, particularly on appointment and removal, than a PCC elsewhere. But some of the PCCs elsewhere have managed to establish records of performance which are considerably less good than the Mayor of London's.
And so just given that, in your kind of the options that you put forward and the way forward for London, what are your views on, do you think it's right that the Mayor of London, as the holder of the office, should have lesser powers than other police and crime commissioners in the rest of the country?
I think it's inevitable because of the London unique point that I made earlier. I think it is a sustainable position. It may not be comfortable for the Mayor. It may not be comfortable with the Home Secretary. But it is a coherent system of dual accountability. But I make 9 recommendations in my report as to how that system could be strengthened. And that was the remit that I was given in my terms of reference.
And I want to ask the Mayor what you think, just reflecting on that, what you think about any possible democratic deficit around this system.
Sure, so we can't escape the fact we're in the capital city, and there are shared accountability between me and the Home Sec and the Prime Minister for obvious reasons, and we can talk about counter-terrorism and that shared responsibility. But in 2011 and 2010, when Parliament was debating and discussing the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011, London was no less unique than it is now. And Parliament was quite clear in relation to the act it passed in 2011, the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011, and then subsequently the Policing Protocol, that the primacy of the Met Police Commissioner lays with the Mayor of London, even if you don't like him, not the Home Secretary. And where do I get that? I get that from Section 3 in the Act. But if you go to the Protocol, which is a useful document to be read in conjunction with the Act, the Protocol says in paragraph 2, and I quote, "This protocol applies to every police and crime commissioner, every, in England and Wales, and the less specifically stated reference in the protocol to a PCC includes MOPAC." The protocol and the Act are quite clear in relation to responsibilities and primacy. Paragraph 14 says, "The public accountability for the delivery and performance of the police service is placed into the hands of the PCC on behalf of their electorate." It goes on to explain the PCC draws their mandate to set and shape strategic objectives. It goes on to say, paragraph 15, the PCC, and this is the important point, which goes to my lack of confidence and so forth with the Commissioner, the PCC within each force area has a statutory duty and electoral mandate, and here's the key bit, to hold the police to account on behalf of the public. So, of course, I work closely with the Home Secretary. Most of the time we do. By and large, it's really important for us to work closely together. There are some anomalies, the appointment, the fire, and so forth of a commissioner that Sir Tom's alluded to. And I make a simple point. What would be the point of a police and crime committee if he or she wasn't accountable to London? The commissioner comes to see you at least 3 times a year, if lucky, once a year before the Home Affairs Select Committee. I speak to the commissioner on a regular basis, almost daily, or his or her deputy, and so forth. Around terrorism, there is a network relationship. It's a national network, and Sir Tom has the 96 Act here. It's Section 22A, if Sir Tom wants to find it, of the 96 Act. So West Midlands is a key player in relation to terrorism, and the Home Secretary does receive on a weekly basis briefings with security services, with the counter-terror lead. But the problem with this report, one of the many problems, is part 2 is based upon a false understanding of where primacy lays. And if the Home Secretary, and there's no danger of the 4th Home Secretary since Priti Patel commissioned the report, actually following the recommendations, it would re-centralise some of the powers that lie with London and would go against the 2011 Act. But if you don't believe the Act, if you don't believe the protocol, what did the policing minister say on the floor of the House just a few weeks ago? The policing minister said that the primacy is with the mayor, not with the Home Secretary. And so if he was wrong, if he had erred, he'd be misleading the House, and nobody in this committee would, I suspect, definitely not the chair, suggest that Kit Malthouse was misleading the House when he said the primacy of accountability lies with the mayor, not the Home Secretary.
Yeah, so just to come back to you, Sir Tom, and your 9 recommendations, you said that you're satisfied in your findings that primacy should remain with the Home Secretary. The Mayor contends that, and from my lay person's understanding, that the Police and Crime Commissioner has a clear role in the day-to-day functions of how the senior officers operate. But in terms of then governance and kind of going forward of those recommendations, what would you suggest in terms of the Mayor of London, the Police and Crime Committee here at the Assembly, and the Metropolitan Police Commissioner about having kind of clarity and bringing up to parity with the rest of the country?
Well, I've made my 9 recommendations, which you've seen. I don't think there is a case for the mayor to have parity with the rest of the country, because London is like no other city. That's the principal point. London, is the national capital. It's the centre for the monarchy, the judiciary, the legislature, politics, media, culture, technology, etc. I've said all this in the report. And therefore, it seems to me that the Home Secretary has a legitimate interest in doing that, for all the reasons given in the Royal Commission of the Police in 1962 and ever since. But there is no doubt at all that the scrutiny available to the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, MOPAC, is a welcome addition to the scrutiny which did not exist when the Home Office were the only police authority for London, because Paul Condon, Lord Condon, who was Commissioner of the Met, said that he was exasperated that as Commissioner of the Met, he couldn't actually get the Home Office to engage with him properly, and he was pleading with them to establish a London-wide authority that he could deal with. And indeed, that is what happened with the Greater London Authority Act 1999. So the scrutiny that is available, the powers of MOPAC in relation to the Met are very considerable, and I do not suggest that they'd be diminished. And indeed, MOPAC is a very active organisation. It has a substantial staff, far, far bigger than any police and crime commissioner, but then London is far, far bigger than anywhere else. But a former deputy commissioner of the Met told me that he spent on average 2 days a week, 2 full days a week, dealing with MOPAC. That's 40% of his time, assuming that every commissioner works 5 days a week, which they don't. 2 whole days a week, just dealing with MOPAC. I think he thought that was too much, and that's footnote 35 on page 71.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question to you, Sir Tom, and I want your views on going forward, because that's where we are. It's clear, obviously, that the Mayor disputes some of your findings of fact. So I'll make a hypothetical question to you. So if, Sir Tom, we had a Mayor who knowingly circumnavigated the law by forcing the resignation of a commissioner. What do you think? What options do you think should be available?
Well, I've given the 9 options in my report, as you've seen. But the fundamental premise is that there's nothing short of the agreement of the mayor or an injunction to prevent a determined politician making a statement to the media saying, I have lost confidence in my chief constable or in the commissioner. There's nothing to stop the mayor or another PCC doing that. So the basis on which I've made my 9 recommendations is that you need to raise the political cost to the politician of doing that, of circumventing or short-circuiting the statutory removal procedure for all the reasons I've given in my report. But if the politician in question makes this calculation that the political advantage of behaving in this way, which I've criticised, is higher than the political cost of doing so, then that politician will do that thing. And the 9 recommendations are all about raising the political cost. But there is nothing that I can think of which would prevent, other than a legislative change saying the politician cannot speak to the media about these things, which is unsustainable. There's nothing that can be done to prevent it happening in all cases.
I noticed that you didn't actually in your, well, I don't think you did in your recommendations, put the possibility of impeaching a rogue mayor, not this one, a rogue mayor, who broke the law. Would that be something that you maybe on reflection may have wished to put in?
There is a 10th option. I decided not to include it in my report because I thought that it would distract from the rest of the report, and I don't think that it is democratically realistic. This option was not one of my devising. It was given to me by a former Home Secretary who was furious with what had happened in the case of Cressida Dick. The option that he put to me, which is not one of the ones in my report, but you raise it, so I'll explain it, was that, and this would apply not just to the Mayor of London, it would apply to any Police and Crime Commissioner. If the PCC in question was either about to or has already made a statement of no confidence and creating, or in some other way, created the conditions which are intolerable to the chief officer, which either have led the chief officer to quit or are likely to lead to the quit, then the Home Secretary should be empowered, not required, to commission a report from an independent body like this one. Probably not the Chief Inspector of Constabulary. I think that, but well, you're not going to do it again, are you? Should it be empowered to commission a report, and if the commissioned report comes out with conclusions as severely adversely critical as this one does, the Home Secretary should be empowered to present an address to the House of Commons, and if that address to the House of Commons criticising the actions of the PCC in question on the basis of the report, if that address is passed, then the office of Mayor or PCC is, by virtue of that vote, vacated. And the vacant office is then subject to a new election, and the defenestrated PCC is not entitled to stand in the subsequent election.
This is a report commissioned by the Home Secretary, whose permanent secretary walked out because of the way he was treated, and now we've got Sir Tom suggesting that the Home Secretary have the power to sack an elected mayor. It just beggars belief.
No, well, I take issue with the mayor because I think I made it clear at the beginning, I have not suggested this. It is not in my report, and I chose not to recommend it because I thought it was democratically unrealistic. But you've asked me a question about impeachment. That is a proposal that was made to me by a former Home Secretary. I did not accept it.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry? Well, I was going to say, Sir Tom, I'm very glad that you didn't include that 10th option in your recommendations, because the point that there is a democratic relationship between the Mayor and Londoners, and this whole situation has arisen through a series of issues that actually relate to trust and confidence, and the trust and confidence of Londoners in our police service. So yes, very glad that option 10 was not included. So I want to look very specifically at the options that you present to us, and it's really useful, the questioning from Assembly Member Moema just earlier, where so Tom, you said London is a unique situation, and there's an uncomfortable but coherent relationship, I think you described, for the governance relationship for the police. And the Mayor set out very helpfully that the 2011 Act is very clear that primacy is with the Mayor rather than with the Home Secretary. So just getting into the actual options that we're looking at. So the first one, which is the policing protocol, and it's about strengthening to replace the obligation to have regard to the protocol with an obligation to comply with it. And I'm just concerned that that might actually fetter the work of the Mayor in oversight of the Met. And I'm going to just give my comments on option 2 at the same time, because you, in your paragraph 380, you refer to those two together. You describe the hardening of the policing protocol and the mandatory mediation are the softest of the options, but they're worthwhile. Their circumvention would still bring considerable political and public criticism. Now, in terms of mandatory mediation, actually, I think that could be helpful if relationships between the Commissioner and MOPAC were difficult. Having a sort of being able to call in mandatory mediation might actually be helpful. But I was just worried about the strengthening of have regard to comply with, and I just wondered if either of you had anything you wanted to say on those two before I move to the next one.
The protocol, the legal obligation in relation to the protocol is the same as the legal obligation in relation to the police and crime plan, which is an obligation to have regard. Have regard doesn't just mean have a read and then put it in the bin. Have regard actually has a special legal status. I'll be happy to provide a lengthy legal opinion to the committee as to what it actually means, because I've had a lot to do with that. But it means really you ought to follow it unless you've got a compelling reason not to.
Which is why I'm questioning why one would strengthen it to comply.
Because in this case it was not complied with.
But setting up of future governance relationship between the Mayor and the Commissioner, given the complex situation of London, based on one set of circumstances, there might be all manner of other sets of circumstances, but you've already said how have regard to doesn't mean set it aside and put it in a cupboard. It means have you paid due regard to it. And I just wonder whether that is a worthwhile thing to pursue forward, given that having regard to it, ought to do the job.
Well, it ought to do the job, but it didn't in this case. But you say, an obligation to comply might fetter the work or fetter the functions or the freedom of action of the mayor. Yes, but then there are lots of rules of law that can constrain the acts of public authorities, including the ordinary rules of public administrative law to act rationally, procedurally, fairly, and lawfully. So it is a strengthening. It shouldn't be necessary, but I think in this case it is a worthwhile thing. The protocol is of enormous importance as determined by the Divisional Court in the South Yorkshire case, which I refer to at length in my report. I was an interested party in that case as a litigant, of course. You mentioned, if I may just come back to a couple of things you said before, very, very briefly. You said it is clear that the mayor has primacy in London over the Home Secretary. In some respects, yes, the mayor is on the front foot in terms of the day-to-day things, the mayor and the commissioner come here to do is, of course, very conspicuous. But not in all things, not in appointment and not in removal, and that's important. And, of course, then there's the power of the purse strings. It was also suggested, I think, that some of the options could undermine or damage the democratic relationship. Sorry, option 10, which is not one of my options. That this would be undermining and contrary to the democratic relationship between the mayor and Londoners. I just make the point there is nothing undemocratic of an address passed by the House of Commons.
Mr. Mayor, did you want to come in there?
Just firstly, every police and crime commissioner has their purse strings dictated by the Home Secretary and the government. I said the anomaly is in the hire and fire, but I think we're in danger of losing the bigger picture with respect. Look, the government said, in its own words, that the 2011 Act, the introduction of PCCs, I'm the PCC, and I quote, is the most significant democratic reform of policing in our lifetime. Right? So Parliament must have intended for there to be a game changer with the PCCs being developed. And what the protocol says is the establishment of PCCs has allowed for the Home Office to withdraw from day-to-day policing matters, giving the police freedom to fight crime as they see fit, and allowing local communities to hold the police to account by the elected mayor doing that. Now, what is a problem in the police that the Commissioner failed to address? Trust and confidence. It's intrinsic to the series of scandals that led to the straw that breaks the camel back. What is the response from Sir Tom? It's to remove even more the powers from Londoners and their democratically elected mayor, police and crime commissioner, and give it to who? The then Home Secretary, Priti Patel.
Although, to be fair to Sir Tom, he did not include option 10. But I agree. There
options 3, 4,
I'm coming
6,
to options
7, 9.
I'm coming
all
to
take away
those.
power from London.
I'm absolutely coming to those. So option 3, with the giving the Home Secretary. Looking at the Home Secretary's powers under Section 40 of the Police Act of 96. So the Home Secretary is actually able to veto a resignation, and that might even mean that a commissioner was forced to stay even if they wanted to resign. Then we get to the delayed resignation with HMCIC, so where the Commissioner indicates an intention to resign, the matter must first be investigated by HMCIC. So the Chief Inspector of Constabulary could be required to investigate the matter, but what if there's a whole clause at 360 which says if MOPAC fails to cooperate and provide information to the investigation in a timely manner, the investigation should assume that MOPAC has no reasons and should report accordingly. But what if the Commissioner fails to cooperate? It feels like this has been written in a way that is written only from the perspective, or that particular one, only from the perspective of looking out for the interests of the Commissioner. And if we're looking forward to the future, we need to be looking at both sides of that relationship. Then we get to option 5, which is interesting in relation to the Assembly, and it talks about introducing new legislation, and I just wanted to clarify on the London Assembly recommendation. Because it says, if the London Assembly's right to approve or veto the Mayor's removal of the Commissioner were denied by circumvention, the Assembly could be required to consider a vote of no confidence in the Mayor. Now, I just wanted to clarify, Sir Tom, do you mean that the Assembly should have a veto on a Commissioner's resignation, or just a veto on a Mayor starting a statutory process for resignation?
The latter.
The latter. Thank you very much for that clarity. So we then get to option 6, which is the veto by HMCIC, and that it absolutely plays to the point of giving the power to unelected people, and in terms of the issues, particularly the issues we have in London, with the extreme issues of broken trust and confidence, and the need to get Londoners on board with really believing that the police service is not misogynistic, sexist, racist, and all the other things that have come out in this series of really shocking events. So we want that seems worrying because it's giving the power to the unelected HMCIC. Then the Home Secretary having a veto at the very beginning of the process, which kind of undermines the point of having a process in the first place if the Home Secretary can veto a process from the very beginning. We then get the recreation of the Metropolitan Police Authority, but I think you even say that doing that is probably a step too far. The London Assembly and the Police and Crime Panel are well established and adequately informed and resourced, can work well. And you also mentioned particularly if a 2/3 majority in the Assembly is adopted. And then we get to the removal of the power of MOPAC.
Assembly Member Ross, are you going to ask a question at the...
Yes, I'm going to...
Excellent, that's fine, thank you.
Most certainly am, but I'm raising several questions about these options as I go through, and I will then come back both to Sir Tom and the Mayor. And in terms of option 9, the removal of the power of MOPAC to remove the Commissioner, I'm not sure that would solve the issue of the Commissioner feeling any pressure to resign, but also that again comes back to the mandate point. So, Sir Tom, out of all these options, do you, I mean, what it looks like to me is mandatory mediation could be helpful. We could possibly do something with the London Assembly and us having some kind of 2/3 majority vote on a decision to ask the Commissioner to resign. We are elected to hold the Mayor accountable, so that might help with the sort of democratic process. But it sort of feels like the options slightly run out of possibility for being helpful.
I'll give a brief response to that. My recommendations are not about removing the powers of Londoners and through their elected representatives. It's about making the Mayor of London more cautious before he, and I don't talk about Mr. Khan, I talk about a notional mayor, making the mayor more cautious before embarking upon a course of conduct of the kind described in Part 1. You make the point, it's all about, it appears to be one-sided. Well, it's not about, it really isn't about being one-sided. It's about protecting a chief officer from a politician behaving badly. It's about protection. It's about respecting and reinforcing the very special constitutional position of senior police officer, in this case the Commissioner of the Met, but there's inevitably a read-on to all the rest of England and Wales, of course, because the senior police officer, the Commissioner of the Met or a Chief Constable elsewhere, is not just a Chief Executive of a public corporation. Because of the unique powers of the police over citizens, the power to stop and search, the power to take away your liberty, the power to charge you, the power to search your home and your person, all those things, the unique coercive power of the state over the citizen, is extremely important that police officers, who are very special in this respect, have appropriate protections from undue political intervention. But I entirely endorse the point that the Mayor made earlier, that the policing protocol and the Police Reform Social Responsibility Act 2011 did effect the greatest change in the democratic public accountability of the police in our lifetimes. In Annex 1 of my report, I explain that the Metropolitan Police is one of the oldest public institution in London, and until 2000 it was not accountable to any local authority. And so it is an improvement, but it's an improvement provided everybody sticks to the rules.
I think you just set out, those powers, those very particular powers that the police have to stop us, to search us, to strip search us. These are powers that the police, the new commissioner has been very clear, have been misused by the Met in London. And so the importance of that elected relationship with the relationship between the people being policed and the people they elect to provide the governance just feels all the more important.
It is important, and I remind the committee of what the Mayor said on the Andrew Marr programme about a year ago, which is the operational independence of the police is enormously important, and no politician, whether he's the Mayor of London or anyone else, should be able to give directions to the police to go and arrest that person or search that person or not arrest that particular person. Operational independence is of enormous importance, and I shall shortly be giving a public lecture on that subject.
I think we can all agree that operational independence is important, but we also need to make sure that that the people who are being policed have confidence and trust in the way that they're being policed. Mr. Mayor, did you want to comment on any of these recommendations?
I think you can guess my views on many of the recommendations. I've explained that recommendations 3, 4, 6, 7, 9 basically are in direct contradiction to the 2011 Act, and they're against what we've experienced in London over the last few years. And look, I mean, I don't want to be unnecessarily offensive, but I think this shows that Sir Tom's bias is seeped into Part 2 as well, in relation to,
Mr. Mayor, can you just be pleasant during this part of it, please?
Chair, hopefully we will pay attention to what has been discussed about these recommendations when we as a committee make our response to this report.
Well, we certainly will.
May I just,
yeah.
I won't deal with the bias point because I think we've done that to death. But the Mayor is entirely right. The recommendations that I'm making in pretty much all 9 options are in contradiction of the regime in the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011. They are proposals or options for consideration in relation to the amendment of the 2011 Act, because the 2011 Act and the Policing Protocol Order 2011 made under the Act have been found to be insufficient to control the actions of a determined politician who does not comply with the law.
And this just confirms, Caroline, the
Thank
point you were making earlier on about the out-of-touchness in relation to what Londoners feel with the lack of trust and confidence, the out-of-touchness with the former Commissioner, the former Chief Inspector, the former Deputy Commissioner, the former Home Secretary, and so forth. Let me be quite clear. I don't resile from my position that I'd lost trust and confidence in the former Commissioner's ability to address the systemic and cultural issues that was shown by a series of scandals,
right,
and her inability to address the lack of trust and confidence.
We are running out of
Thank
time.
you.
Can we stick to these options? Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. I mean, I just want to take a step back because actually listening to this discussion, obviously we're focused on the process around removing the former commissioner. But actually, it seems to me that potentially there are other issues with the whole setup of police and crime commissioners across the country. I'd be interested to know whether you think actually a wider piece of work needs to take place, because in some ways this highlights the danger of all the powers, as it were, in one person, without necessary checks and balances. So I'm wondering whether you would support a sort of wider review and obviously strengthening the power of the London Assembly and the Police and Crime Committee in any sort of review and reformed legislations. Perhaps start with you, Sir Tom.
Very briefly, I inevitably this report is about London and what happened, but it is inescapable that some of the recommendations here would have a knock-on effect. In other words, if they were right for London, they are almost certainly right for police and crime commissioners elsewhere. And that's why I've expressed no firm preference for any single option, as I say in paragraph 381, because I think it needs to be put in the wider context. But the real point is that the model of democratic accountability that we had in relation to the police before the creation of PCCs was flawed in a number of respects, because police authorities were almost invisible and in many respects ineffective. I think the MPA actually was probably the most effective of all of them. But nevertheless, Parliament chose to create PCCs, and I think the principal point, I've made this point on so many occasions when I was Chief Inspector of Constabulary, is if you're going to create an accountability model with real legal powers in relation to the police, and you're going to put all that power in the hands of one person, you better be really sure you get the right person.
Well, that's kind of for
and
the
that is a matter for the voters.
Yeah, that's for the electorate to decide. But it's the checks and balances. I'm wondering whether being in the post, obviously we've got this specific issue we're looking at today, but actually wider, whether you think there's some reforms needed to the legislation.
So Tom plays a lot of weight with one person having a huge amount of power, but no problem when it's the Home Sec Priti Patel, right? Or another Home Sec. But when it's 43 individuals voted by the population with a mandate, understanding that you can't get involved in operational matters, he has a problem with that. I've got a problem with that view, because I think there should be more accountability, a lot less. And the key point is this: the current commissioner gets it. More trust, higher standards, less crime. And that comes from his experience of how London has perceived the former commissioner, I'm sure. And I think we shouldn't be talking about taking powers away from democratically elected police and crime commissioners, as Sir Tom wants to do. We should be building on the 2011 Act. There are anomalies. The inability of the London Police and Crime Commissioner to appoint the Commissioner, the inabilities of the London Police and Crime Commissioner when it comes to getting rid of a Commissioner. I understand, as a capital city, there's going to be shared responsibility, and that works pretty well. But let's be frank, that a lot of these recommendations are about centralising power with one politician, the Home Secretary, and maybe with her governor, the Prime Minister, not about reforming the police for the better.
Okay, so my question there was wider than just the specific about the commissioner appointment and removal. It's whether actually there are wider anomalies that you think need to be picked up in any review, and whether you would welcome strengthening the power of the Police and Crime Committee of the London Assembly in that process.
That would be consistent with other PCCs around the country, the two-thirds point.
Yeah.
No problems with that. I mean, I think it's a good thing that you and the form that is a PCC has more powers. That's going to London as having more power. Got no problems with that. And
the tension we discussed earlier with the Home Secretary, the obvious way to resolve that, which gets discussed quite a lot, is you remove counter-terrorism and stuff away into another agency and make the Met, the police service for London, and then those specialist services are run by another agency, which the Home Secretary would be in charge of. What's your thinking on that?
Your problem with you forget that actually we're the eyes and the ears, right?
Yeah.
And actually, you and I have talked in the past, and other Labour colleagues have talked in the past, and Green colleagues, about the importance of neighbourhood officers. Often they're the people, because of the relationship with the public, they get the information that relies upon, I think, 40-odd terrorist operations being thwarted since 2017. So you can't disentangle counter-terror policing from policing. I think it was Craig Mackey that explained a consequence of austerity was few police officers, bobbies and the beats, and less intelligence, and it was directly linked with his concerns around the terror threats. So you can't disentangle it. There are some areas where there's got to be shared responsibility, and of course I understand that in relation to the briefings the Home Sec has from the agencies, MI6, MI5, and so forth. But actually, that's one area where works really well. All Home Secretaries I've worked with, whole Prime Ministers, on the issue of security, it's been fantastic relationships, and they've all been conservative, so it's not party political.
And have you had any discussions with the latest Home Secretary about any reforms, whether it's around this or any other reforms?
I mean, listen, Priti Patel, Grant Shapps, beg your pardon, Priti Patel, Swallow Braverman, Grant Shapps, Swallow Braverman, none of them have raised the issue of Sir Tom Windsor's report, either part 1 or part 2 with me or anybody in MOPAC or City Hall.
Okay, and Sir Tom, finally, have you had any discussions with the latest Home Secretary about your proposals and what's your thoughts on whether you need to split the roles of the Met?
No, I haven't spoken to the Home Secretary about this. A lot has happened since my report produced. I mean, it came out on the 2nd of September. Liz Truss got the PM job on the 5th. The Queen died on the 9th. You know, people have been busy. I mean, I know they're looking at it at official level. I know what they think. Just one point that I don't know what's going to happen. The Mayor makes the point about the proposals being a centralisation of power and the Home Secretary being a single person, sort of autonomous person. I'm paraphrasing him. Let's remember that the Home Secretary is accountable to the Cabinet and to the Prime Minister and is removable at will. The Mayor of London is not removable at any time other than an election unless he commits a crime.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. I'm mindful of the fact it's 1 o'clock and I've got 4 people that have still indicated. So can you make your questions as quick as possible? We'd all be grateful. Assembly Member Desai. No, if you can all be that quick, that would be brilliant. Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor, the new Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has signed a document with the MOPAC upon his appointment. Are you confident that this document is consistent with the statutory requirements?
By the way, I'm not accepting that the previous document from the previous Commissioner wasn't consistent with statutory requirements. I'm saying there's improvements being made to Sir Mark's terms of appointment, and we're happy with it, yeah.
Yes, so why not? Do you think there are other areas of police reform, right? Particularly when it's about looking at how police officers are dismissed, right? And does those powers need revising also?
Yeah, and Sir Mark's working closely with not just City Hall MOPAC, but also the government in relation to reforms around here, so he can get rid of more swifter officers that shouldn't be serving officers. But you've seen the actions he took with former officers. You compare and contrast that with a former commissioner with serving officers, some have been promoted.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devonish.
Thank you. So, Tom, you've just said, I quote, that you know what the officials think of your report. You're able to say a little bit more about that, please?
No. Because the officials have their own view, but the officials are the instruments of the Home Secretary, the decision makers of the Home Secretary. I know that the Home Secretary is interested, but I don't know what she thinks and what she's going to do about it. Bear in mind that the Home Office have been carrying out for quite a number of months a very comprehensive review of the policing protocol, and I'm sure that their recommendations to the Home Secretary, which I think have gone in, have regard to part 2 of my report. But I don't know what their recommendations are, and I don't know what the Home Secretary thinks.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, this has been quite a negative discussion over the last 2 meetings. I think you probably agree. Do you think the status quo is sustainable in terms of this governance? And did you want to finish by paying tribute to Sir Tom for a decade of public service?
I don't think you should indirectly criticise the Chair for bad chairing of the PCC meeting of the last 2 times I've been here. I've been quite clear. I think his report is biased. I think he's missed out important information. Of course, I thank all public servants, whether they're chief inspectors, former chief inspectors, police officers, teachers, train workers, paramedics, and others who serve at the public expense. I'm giving more credit when they're former firebrand socialists, as Sir Tom was. I never was. I'm a social democrat, but of course I want to thank him for his long service. I'm looking forward to, at the end of my service, being taken to the Wolseley for supper by you, Tony, just you and me together, table of two.
Gosh, I can't imagine.
I don't know what to say to that, apart from, finally, on a serious point, Mr. Mayor,
very quickly,
will you be reflecting on this whole saga? And Sir Tom's about to give a lecture, he said, at some stage on these issues. Will you be coming back in terms of the governance, in terms of you and the Commissioner?
No, let me be quite clear. I think the process of the former acting Commissioner, who had been brought back as somebody who'd been sacked as Chief Constable of Scotland, I beg your pardon, resigned as Chief Constable of Scotland by the former Commissioner, asking Priti Patel as the Home Secretary to look into the circumstances around the departure of his mentor, and then asking somebody who, during this period, had decided to leave as a Chief Inspector role, and we now discover was meeting the former Commissioner. There's only one report that's going to come out of that process. I'm surprised, though, that part two is as it is, because I'd have hoped that Sir Tom would be able to have Chinese walls inside his mind in relation to part one and part two, but I'm afraid a lot of the bias I've talked about has seeped into part two, and I suspect this report will gather dust on shelves and not go anywhere.
I'd like to give Sir Tom the final word, please. Anything you'd like to add, Sir Tom?
There has been no bias, and that has been explained a score of times. As far as the proposals for reform are concerned, I think that they'll be properly considered, and I'll be quite happy to take the Mayor out to dinner.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, okay, I think...
Wolseley, and you pay all day long, mate.
Yeah. Well, okay, thank you very much. I do hope that some of these propositions are taken up, Sir Tom, because we must make sure that Sir Mark Rowley has confidence going forward that he won't end up in the same position as Cressida Dick ended up. I know you've been looking very bored for the last hour or so, Mr. Mayor. If you want to go now, you may. So I would like to thank our guests for attending the meeting today, particularly on Windsor through the ice and the snow to get here. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the work programme for the 22-23 Assembly year?
Noted.
Right. Do I have to read all of this out? Yes, I do. Note the cover letter and summons notice sent to the Mayor of London as outlined in the agenda report. And can we note the monthly report from the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime?
Noted.
Thank you so much. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for Wednesday, the 11th of January 2023 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes... Oh, yes, a very Merry Christmas to all my colleagues, and most certainly Sir Tom Windsor. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. That concludes today.